Hey everybody, welcome to The Hang Up. We are live. This is right here on the line on YouTube. If you're watching it somewhere else or somehow else, well, okay, you found a secret way to watch it. Maybe you're watching on the new TikTok, which is at Q&A line. If you're not already following it, go follow it, check it out. I'm Matt Dillahunty. This is my Wednesday night show where we talk about whatever the hell Matt's hung up about. And that means that, as with all the other shows, Theists will, of course, get priority. But in an election year, as we are in now, there's going to be a lot more focused on the election in the United States and all of the things. I can't even begin to keep up with all that's going on. Like, I know it's about like 90 charges. I don't know how many indictments. I find myself very confused every day when I watch. I was going to say otherwise reasonable people, but I can no longer use that phrase. When I watch Trump supporters denying reality, I've seen people come out and say, oh, I think, former Trump supporters who are like, oh, I think I was in a cult. I'm not convinced that it qualifies as a cult, but I have no expertise on the cult-like aspect of it. But it certainly could be viewed as cult-like, this denial of reality, this merging of Christian nationalism supporting a man who, when I was a fundamentalist Christian, nobody in my family, nobody in my church, nobody that I knew would have considered Trump to be God's representative of anything other than possibly the Antichrist. And yet I get why a chunk of them vote for them, or vote for him, in the sense of, we're single issue voters and we're going to vote for Merca. We're going to vote against Roe. We're going to, whatever the issue is. And they just go down that route. But there are so many indictments, so many different trials. It's really strange for me to wake up every day and try to follow what's going on. Now, there's a bunch of church-state separation issues or separation of religion and government issues that we have. I've been following a bit. Huge thank you to Hamid Mehta for, I don't know. Hamid Mehta, as I've said before, is one of the best of us and is constantly pushing out all the information that I don't have the time or the ability to dig in on and know fully well what's going on. And I'm not just going to sit here and babble for several minutes because I don't know enough, and because I watched after an $83.3 million judgment. I also saw the DC Circuit Court has done a ruling, and rather than getting any of it wrong with regard to which case it's about or what the impact is or anything else, I'm just going to straight up bring in my guest tonight. It's been long overdue. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Seidel back to The Hang Up.
Hello, my friend. It's good to be with you. As you were doing that, I was reminded of, I don't know if you remember this because it seems like it was so long ago, but it was just at the beginning of the Trump term when we learned that Steve Bannon's strategy was to, quote, flood the zone with shit. I don't know if you remember that at all. That's what they did. And now we're sort of like, the zone is being flooded with, oh, you have fucked around and now you're finding out. And it's a lot to keep up with, even for me, there are a lot of lawyers out there. Which one is this? What's happening? So I'm going to do the best I can. But it's a lot to watch. It's a fire hose of information.
Yeah. If it weren't for the fact that I love talking with you and doing shows with you whenever I can. I would have just skipped tonight, turned the show over to you to be the constitutional freedom lawyer protector that we needed. So I guess before we go on to the oral arguments that are going to happen tomorrow on, it's the Colorado case, right?
Correct. Yes. The disqualification case is tomorrow.
Jack, is it Jack? Not White.
I mean, how awesome would that be? Smith, but yes.
Yeah, Jack Smith. I knew it was something plain like that. So one of the things that happened is the DC Circuit Court has ruled that Trump, and it wasn't a ruling on Trump. It was, no, it's ridiculous to say that presidents should have unqualified immunity for things that they commit, crimes that they potentially committed or are accused of committing while they're in office. Tell us, I know Jack basically pushed for the court to make a ruling on this and to get it moving quickly because this could affect the election. Because the first thing that happens is, in my head, when I hear this, is like, hooray. And then the second thing that happens in my head is, oh, are we going to get a resolution on this before he potentially wins re-election and then tries to pardon himself, where we're now dealing with another constitutional crisis? So I'm going to shut up and let you teach, and I'll interject with questions when I don't understand or when somebody in chat doesn't. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these are all really kind of important points, and I will try to do this, but definitely please interrupt me with questions. And you've hit a kind of on the most important thing, is not necessarily the decision in this case, which is, legally speaking, it's kind of a no-brainer, but the delay. It's the timeline is the real concern here. So this is Jack Smith's case against Trump for the January 6th insurrection. That's how I'm going to refer to it. You can at me, but that's what it was. And Trump has argued that he is immune from prosecution for this, even though now he is like fully out of office, no longer president. And as I said, the court this is not actually a hard case. It's a criminal case, but for the court, it said, for the purpose of this criminal case, former President Trump has become citizen Trump. Okay, so he's no longer president, he's a citizen. He has all the same rights and protections that any normal citizen has. The court also went out of its way and it said, look, we can't accept that a president has unbounded authority to commit crimes, right? That's what he's asking for. He is essentially asking for the president to be above the law. And that just makes no sense in our constitutional order. In fact, the president is charged. He has to take care that the law is enforced. That's written into the Constitution. The idea that he could violate it with impunity is nuts. But as you hit, the real question here is the timeline. Trump's goal here is to delay the trial in this case for as long as possible, to put it off. Okay, so it was originally scheduled for March 4th. And that's not going to happen now. It's been delayed beyond that, probably. Well, certainly. We just don't know when. This decision took 28 days from oral argument to its issuance. That's a pretty long delay. Trump's plan, again, it's not to win the case. It's to delay the case and then win the election. He wants to delay the trial as long as possible, win the presidency, and then, you mentioned possibly pardoning himself. That may or may not happen, but he could also destroy the prosecution against him. He could fire Jack Smith, and he absolutely will do that. So that's why the kind of the most important part of the decision, beyond the obvious, is what it does to the trial. So that raises a whole host of questions of basically like, oh, well, then what next? Right now we have this decision, and what happens next? And so now there's a whole bunch of big question marks about that. We can fill in some of those blanks though.
So right now the Georgia case seems to be, as far as like where in the process we are, is going faster than Jack Smith's cases, or further along, or and I just saw a news article an hour before we went live of a judge in a case has heard that Weisselberg is gonna cut a deal on perjury, and is now requesting information on that. do we have any clue what he lied about and whether or not this is also going to be devastating?
So that, I mean, I think we can be sure that it's not going to be good. That is one of the flooding the zone with responsibility and the fucking around and finding out that I have not had a chance to dig into today. I've been so consumed with regular job and then this DC court opinion, which really is, it's one of the big ones. And then oral argument tomorrow is in the Colorado disqualification case is fascinating. And, to get to some of the, like, what happens next with Jack Smith, because I think that's like really a really important question. It all has to do with how the court in the DC Circuit panel, the DC Circuit panel decision, decides what happens with its opinion. And so this is called a mandate, the court's mandate. When does it go into effect? Okay, because that determines when the trial at the lower level can move forward. And the DC Circuit only held their opinion until Monday. So if that's as far as it went. Now Trump has to ask the Supreme Court to stay that mandate. And stay, that just means put it on hold. And sure. This is this is a little bit different than the way that it normally works. So what the DC Circuit Court is actually saying is this trial can move forward, even if the Supreme Court is considering whether or not to take the case. The only way that it gets put on hold is if the Supreme Court actually decides to stay the appellate court's mandate. And this is, I'm trying not to use lingo here, so I apologize, and stop me if this gets out of crazy. But whether or not to take a case, that's 4 votes at the Supreme Court. Whether or not to stay a case requires 5 votes at the Supreme Court. So it's a higher bar. And to grant that stay, the court is supposed to find that Trump has a likelihood of success on the merits of the case. And you can see, if you read the DC Circuit's opinion, I already said this is sort of a no-brainer. The DC Circuit's opinion is almost 60 pages, and the reasoning in it is really, really strong. The court also went out of its way to cite Thomas and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, right? Basically saying, like, hey, if you want to appear logically consistent and stick to, the stance that you have written down in previous decisions, you've got to decide with us on this stuff. So there's some really interesting elements of what the court did. And they essentially were able to, because of what they did, they cut out the ability of Trump to delay the case by asking the entire DC Circuit to review it. Trump can do that, but it won't delay the case. And that cuts out like 4 months of possible delay that Trump could have done. So they are seeming to fast track it.
And that's, anybody that drags their feet right now, just increases the likelihood of a muddy constitutional crisis heading into an election or immediately following an election. Now, oral arguments for Colorado start tomorrow. The Colorado case, by the way, is one where they're trying to say that Trump, by virtue of inciting an insurrection, should be disqualified or is not eligible to be president and therefore couldn't be on the ballot. I watched a couple of discussions about this is happening in a couple different states, and one of the states, I guess was Colorado the first one, and then there was, I think, Michigan, but they came down differently. But it's because they don't have the same law about like ballot integrity. I'm not getting the language right, but what are we looking for tomorrow?
There are quite a few different cases that are happening right now, and this one is, to me, this is the complicated one. I would sit on this call and talk with you about this for hours and hours and hours. I think it is just the most fascinating case out there right now. So let me just set this. Yes, there are a bunch of these cases going on. Minnesota had one, Michigan had one, and then actually there's a lot now happening as a result of this. Colorado was the first court to say that Trump was disqualified from the ballot. Then the Maine Secretary of State followed suit, and then kind of all hell broke loose, and now the Supreme Court has the Colorado case before it. So that case is called Trump versus Anderson. And that's because Norma Anderson is one of the people challenging Trump's qualifications for being on the Colorado ballot. Norma Anderson is a Republican. The other people challenging Trump's ability to be on the ballot are Republicans and independents. Norma is 91 years old. She was a lifelong Republican until Trump. And she's not just a voter. She's actually a leader of the Colorado Republican Party. Right? She served as a Republican in the Colorado House for a decade. She served as a Republican in the Colorado Senate for almost another decade. She was the first woman to serve as majority leader in both houses of the Colorado legislature, again, as a Republican. Okay. I mean, this is the person who is challenging Trump's ability to be on the ballot. And I think it's really important that people know that, because it's this whole thing is cast as, partisan, this Democratic attack on Trump. It is fundamentally not about that. This is honestly one of the most patriotic lawsuits I think I've ever seen. And the result of her challenge was a 133-page opinion from the Colorado Supreme Court, a 4-3 opinion that disqualifies Trump from the ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And again, brought by all registered Republicans and independents. And the way it works, to your question sort of about, ballot integrity, under Colorado law, only, quote, qualified candidates, that's the phrase, qualified candidates can be placed on the ballot. And because Trump committed an insurrection, he's not qualified. That's the sort of short version of the case. I'm more than happy to do like a deep dive legal explainer if you want to buckle up and come along with me.
And we can definitely dig in on that. The thing is,
yeah.
I'll get back to the law for a minute. On a practical level, if Colorado determines that Trump can't be on the ballot, and several other states do as well. Now, Trump's not going to win California no matter what. It doesn't matter if he's on the ballot. He's not getting any of their electoral votes. Based on, we're trusting polling to some extent. Just like Texas is probably not going blue, just like every other year where we've talked about it possibly. I mean, Ted Cruz has got a difficult race, a more difficult race than he's had most of the time. But we don't have, Beto didn't make his run against Abbott. Abbott is, basically lost his mind to whatever extent he ever had it, where because the Supreme Court upheld because the court said, hey, the federal agents can go in and remove the razor wire along the border, but they didn't say that there was any problem with Texas putting the razor wire up. This is when you have incredibly narrow legal decisions. So now you can have Texas just putting up more razor wire as the federal government comes in and takes it all down, and everybody's doing everything legal. Meanwhile, it is a complete waste of money and time, and people are at risk and dying. I'm looking at stuff like this happening. I'm looking at what's happening in Colorado. How much does it matter if Trump is not allowed to be on the ballot in states where he's not going to win anyway, and where there's no split of electoral votes? It'd be like, hey, we're having a presidential election and there's zero chance that Trump can win state A, but that was true whether he was on the ballot or not. And so are there states where there's actually that Trump needs, where if Colorado successfully removes him from the ballot, it could that could happen in those states as well? Because not every state has the same guarantee of, making sure the ballots are valid.
Yes and no. God, lawyers are the worst, aren't they, Matt? Yes and no. So for instance, like Wisconsin and Michigan, even though these have already kind of been tried in Michigan, you could see that happening. But I think the better answer is that is why the Supreme Court is taking this case. And that's why the Supreme Court kind of actually has to decide the case, so that there is not a patchwork of states deciding he can or can't be on the ballot, but that there is a decision that applies across the board to Trump or to this election, to the 14th Amendment as it's understood, so that we don't have that kind of situation going into the election itself, so that we can avoid that. I mean, that is why we have to have the Supreme Court weigh in on it. And I think, I think I think explaining it a little bit more will help, because honestly, like, legally, this really is not all that complicated. It's been made very complicated, but people who wish to hold office have to meet certain basic requirements under our Constitution. They're spelled out in the Constitution, right? You have to be 35 years of age or older. You have to be born in the United States, right? Trump infamously tried to cast, aspersions on Obama about meeting these qualifications. You also have to be a resident of the United States for 14 years. Okay. All of that's just written down in the Constitution. You can't vote for somebody, no matter how bad you want to, who doesn't meet those basic qualifications, right? Like,
This is the wrench I was going to throw you.
Yeah.
Cenk from the Young Turks, and I don't know if he's pulled out or anything, but announced that he was running for president to coincide with his new book. But he's from Turkey. And there was this question of, is it possible for someone who's not eligible to be president, is it legally permissible for them to be on a ballot and for people to cast votes? And it seems that the answer is, like every fucking thing I hear from every lawyer, it depends, and it depends on what state you're in.
So the Colorado court did look into this a little bit. And that is one of the kind of open questions getting to your sort of patchwork question, right? So, like, one of the things the Colorado Supreme Court did in its opinion was basically ask, like, do we have the authority to do this? And they looked around at the precedent and they found good precedent saying, yes, we did. In fact, what they did was they quoted Neil Gorsuch. To Neil Gorsuch, because he's going to be the one deciding the case. So there was this 2012 case in Colorado where the 10th Circuit, which is where Neil Gorsuch was sitting, it's 10th Circuit Federal Court of Appeals, affirmed the Colorado Secretary of State's decision to exclude a naturalized citizen from the presidential ballot, which is essentially the exact case that you're talking about. Then Judge, now Justice Neil Gorsuch, wrote in that case that a state has a, quote, legitimate interest in protecting the integrity and practical functioning of the political process, so it's permitted to exclude from the ballot candidates that are constitutionally prohibited from assuming office. So, yes, states have the power to exclude people from the ballot. Now, states may not exercise it, they may not want to. Other states may not see themselves as having that power. Other secretaries of state may not want to take that power on, but there's good precedent for it, certainly. And I think, that is going to be one of the questions that the Colorado court answers. At its most basic question, that's what we're talking about in this case. We're talking about qualifications for public office. I really liked Obama as a president. Another qualification is you can't have served 2 terms as president already to be president. No matter how bad I want him to be president for a 3rd term, it ain't going to happen. Can't happen. A lot of people loved Arnold Schwarzenegger as governor, not natural born, can't be president. These are just basic qualifications that we have for public office. And one of the qualifications that we have for public office in this country is that you can't be a traitor. And this is not, I think, that big a stretch. Basically, if you swore an oath to protect the Constitution and then you violate that oath by waging war or insurrection against the Constitution, you're ineligible for public office. In terms of history, like, this is incredibly mild. Most traitors throughout history, like, they don't just get disqualified for public office. Like, their heads end up on a pike. That's what happens to most. It's death penalties. That's what we're talking about. There's Thaddeus Stevens, who's sort of this famous American statesman from the Reconstruction era, said that never has treason felt the hand of law so lightly. And he was talking about Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which was passed to disqualify insurrectionists from holding public office. basic stuff here.
All right. So apart from my sidetrack, it seems that Cenk's wasting everybody's time to whatever extent. And there was a part of me that was kind of hoping that he was not remotely serious, but was trying to get this issue before a court in a way. It would be so cool if somebody was decent enough and prescient enough to say, I'm going to do this to force a court to rule on it because I already see what's coming down the track, here. I don't think that's what.
Well, look, I mean, there are actually a lot of cases already on this. Like, there, especially on those easy qualifications, right? Like age and birth, and and all that stuff. Like, those are easy questions. And this is an easy question too. It's just we don't have a lot of history because most presidents don't commit insurrection. Like, there's only been like one pretty big insurrection in our past. People may remember it. I'm not sure if we had a pretty bad war in this country. Some people may remember that. Some people wanted to own other people. Those people wanted to be free. There was an insurrection, a civil war, tearing apart the Union in the name of owning human beings. A lot of people died.
Yeah, I heard Nikki Haley even acknowledged it finally on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's people out there who are saying states' rights, but no, that's not accurate. It was about slavery. Anyway, it was this bad war. And that led us to pass these really important amendments to our Constitution. We banned owning people first. Great. And then we realized that, look, if our government is going to survive and our government is going to function, it can't be taken back over by the traitors who wanted to own people. We had to do something else. So they passed Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Pretty basic stuff.
Yep. All right. Keep going on Colorado. Okay. Part of it is, I mean, obviously we're going to have to get to calls soon, and there are already calls wanting to weigh in on things. What should we look for tomorrow with regard to Colorado? And since the DC Circuit Court only held their thing till Monday, how likely are we to hear from the Supreme Court on this? What should everybody be paying attention to and ready to talk about in order to inform their OAN, Fox News, watching confused MAGA friends who think that this is just a Joe Biden's plot to maintain the presidency?
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple things. Like, I think it's pretty much guaranteed that Trump is going to so I'll talk about Jack Smith, DC Circuit Court first. I think it's pretty much guaranteed that Trump is going to ask the court for a stay by Monday. And then we're going to see what the court does. And again, to grant that stay, it's going to take 5 votes. And the court is supposed to find that Trump has a likelihood of success on the merits of his case, which, again, should be impossible for this case. If they don't grant that stay, then the trial court can start preparing that trial. While that's happening, Trump will also be asking the Supreme Court to take the case. Which the Supreme Court does not have to do. That's called asking the court for cert. It's a cert petition of certiorari. And while that's happening, the trial court can be preparing to go to trial. Jack Smith can be preparing his trial. Then the Supreme Court will also have to decide, okay, well, do we take the case? Do we grant cert and review this case or not? I asked quite a few lawyer friends about this, had some really fun sort of discussions on what might happen. One strain of thought is that the court kind of has to take this case because of how important it is. One strain of thought is that the court is going to take it and find that Trump is not immune here, and then give him a win in the Colorado case to try to balance out what it's doing publicly, but really would still give Trump a W because, again, remember, Trump doesn't care about winning the merits of this immunity case. He cares about delaying it so that the trial cannot happen before he, in his mind, wins the election. So there's also a small chance that some of us are thinking that maybe the court doesn't take the case. They deny cert. The DC Circuit's opinion is really, really strong. I think it's airtight. Interestingly, it's a per curiam opinion, as was the Colorado Supreme Court's opinion. And what that means is it's Latin for by the court, basically. Normally in an opinion, a judge writes the opinion and then the other judges sign on. And sometimes judges will sign on and then write their own opinion to go with it, called a concurrence, or they'll disagree and they'll write a dissent. In this case, the entire court agreed with the opinion, and there was no named judge. And that per curiam opinion happens in kind of big cases. We saw it in Bush versus Gore. We saw it in Brown versus Board of Education. We saw it in the Colorado Supreme Court. And it's a way to sort of signal that this is a really important case, and we are speaking with one voice. There are no cracks here. There's no real legal argument here. This is clear, and this is the way it needs to go. So a couple different options for the Supreme Court there. I will say this, and this is what I think this is, and maybe this is the thing that everybody who's watching this should take away. I think you should not expect any, at no point, based on anything I say, should you expect the Supreme Court to save us. The Supreme Court is not our savior. Again, in this case, it doesn't have to decide for Trump to give him a win. All it has to do is drag its feet. All it has to do is delay. If it does that, Trump needs what he gets what he needs. And if you are worried about this, and you are worried about this case, and you're worried about all these cases, and don't know what the fuck to do, and are scanning around, my advice to you is to help make sure that Trump gets buried in a popular vote landslide and an electoral college avalanche. Make it so that we are not deciding an election by 40,000 votes in 3 states. Find a way to work your ass off to make sure that this menace loses, and loses big. That's my advice in this, because I think you should be worried about what the court's going to do here. So that's DC Circuit. I'm going to say that probably version of that speech again. I think it's really important. The Colorado case, the 14th Amendment case, is much, much harder to predict what's going to happen. And that's because there are about 8 different holdings in the Colorado Supreme Court opinion, 8 different things that the court decided, all of which offer the Supreme Court a way out. The Colorado Supreme Court said that Section 3 of the 14th, one of the holdings was, or actually, let me phrase it like this. The court could say that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to the president. And that's actually one of Trump's main arguments, and I'm happy to circle back to why I think that's probably the most likely. They could say that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment has to have a law to have any kind of legal effect, right? That Congress should have passed a law to give that any legal effect. I think that's a stupid argument, but it's out that they have. They could wiggle on what an insurrection is. They could wiggle on whether January 6th meets the definition of insurrection. My guess is that they probably don't want to be engaged in a fact discussion here and sorting through Trump's tweets and his speech about it. They could look at the phrase engage in insurrection, which is in the 14th Amendment, and say, did Trump actually do this? What does that actually mean? That's another way out. Was what Trump did protected by the First Amendment? Is another way out. And then another one that you'll hear a lot about is was the process that Colorado used, the procedure of actually removing him from the ballot, protective enough of his and his voters' rights. That's the due process argument, which due process also incidentally comes from the 14th Amendment. So, and then I think there's likely going to be a lot of talk about democracy tomorrow. Yeah. And whether or not removing Trump from the ballot is a gross insult to democracy and to his voters, which I think gets it completely backwards.
It's so wild. I'm gonna move on to callers because there's people calling in with specific
questions. I'm sure.
But there's a constitutional scholar that made a comment, I think in the last day or so, that I wanted to address, and her name's Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she was basically excoriating people for January 6th was just citizens protesting, and all of you called it an insurrection, but there were 30,000 troops here for Joe Biden's inauguration, and none of you called that an insurrection. Just for clarity, from a legal standpoint, how stupid is Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Yeah, I mean, what's the I don't know that our legal scales tip quite that far. Lady Justice holds the scales, and that's how we measure these things. And I'm not sure that it actually goes that far down.
She can't bend over backwards that far. It was hilarious to watch this because I'm like, yes, sending out 30,000 National Guard troops to protect the Capitol is not an insurrection. That is not even in the same ballpark as, making sure the peaceful transition of power takes place. By the way, that was only necessary because of the January 6th stuff and because they said they were going to do it again.
Yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable. It really is the gall of these people. Anyway, yes, let's. Well, also, just sorry, Matt. One thing I always tell people, tell people to run for office all the time, and I've said this on this show. I know I have, and people are always like, "Yeah, Andrew, I'm not qualified. What do I know about running for office?" And just Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm just pointing to Marjorie Taylor Greene and the things she says, and Lauren Boebert and the things she says. Like, they are in the United States Congress. Like, yes, you're qualified for office if you're watching this. If you care about these issues. Oh, Jesus. Okay.
She really wants to make sure that Joe Biden gets indicted. For those who don't know, she mispronounced when she was reading something. She did not know the word indicted, and so read it as indicted. And Jamie Raskin just, bulldozed her in a statement where he was like, hey, you guys are sitting here, you're trying to, get Joe Biden for something. You got no evidence of any wrongdoing ever. There's nothing indictable or indictable, if you prefer. He said something like that in the message to basically call her
he's
out.
The best.
The stupid is on parade in a big way. Let me get a couple of announcements out of the way real quick, and then we'll go on to our callers. This is the line. Today's the hang up. I don't know how much time we're going to spend on the normal arguing for God, but there are a couple of theists who have called in, and they will be up right after our first call. Tomorrow on the line is the Transatlantic Call-In Show with Katy and Arden at 2 p.m. Central. If you have questions about trans rights issues, which, by the way, there's a new survey that just hit, or new results from a survey. I suspect that Arden or someone will be mentioning it tomorrow. I know that Josie was involved. We are finding out a lot more about what percentage of the trans community has felt the need to potentially leave their state and move somewhere else, and what percent have actually done it. I can't say for sure that that'll be discussed tomorrow, but it was really good information that we were reading just when we went out to dinner right before the show. This Sunday on the Sunday show, Jimmy will be on with me to take all your calls on all of your God stuff. So if we don't get to, or if anybody here, if Theist is calling in and we don't dig in on it as much as you'd like or whatever else, we can do that on Sunday. Monday, Skeptalk will be hosted by Aron Ra, who will be returning from a cruise. So that'll be awesome. Tuesday will be the premiere of our new woman-led atheist show. The name is still in progress, but basically that's going to be replacing Dying Out Loud. All our best and all our love to Dave Warnock, who is no longer going to be doing shows, and he's going to be dealing with end-of-life issues. I wish I could give Dave a big hug, and by all means, everybody still send him your love and best desires as he faces those things. But we are going to be premiering this new show on Tuesday. We'll have more information on it probably on Sunday when Jimmy and I are here. Next Wednesday, I'll be back with the hang up with John Gleason. And in addition, you should go to Q&A. Well, I don't have my merch link. I lost my merch link. Linemerch.com. How do I forget linemerch.com? I bet Arden's got a wonderful advertisement for line merch stuff that just floats in over the top of everybody, where you can see the cool hoodies and the t-shirt and the coffee cups, the dishwasher safe coffee cups for those people who had asked for that. And yeah, that's what's going on here on the Line Network. But up first with questions from our audience, we have Mary in Florida. Pronouns she, her, has questions about an amicus brief. So Mary, I turn you over to Andrew.
Hi, Matt.
Hi, Mary.
Andrew. Thank you so much. Yes. What I don't know if you've read the amicus brief written by a few attorneys and the very respected conservative judge, Ludwig, I think is how you pronounce his name.
Michael Ludwig, yeah.
Yes. What sway will that have on the Supreme Court, that amicus brief that they wrote, if any?
So, yes. So, for people out there who may not be familiar, an amicus brief is amicus. It's friend of the court, is what it means. So, those are people who are not parties to the case. Get to submit briefs to the Supreme. Can in certain cases submit briefs to the Supreme Court, and the court will listen to what they have to say if they have an interest. So, in this case, the case is Trump versus Anderson. So Norma Anderson and her attorneys get to submit a brief, and Trump and his attorneys get to submit a brief. Colorado's Secretary of State does. Right. That's the parties in the case. But the court often, especially the Supreme Court, will hear from amici. I've written a number of amicus briefs in cases involving separation of church and state. I didn't hear. And this is, Mary, this is a big debate that goes on in the legal community. That people have done studies, they've tried to crunch the numbers and looked at like what value does submitting one of these amicus briefs actually give to the justices, to the court. This case is a little different for a couple of reasons about why I think maybe more so than normal these briefs will have an impact. And one reason is because there's basically so little case law on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, right? Like there's a ton of Supreme Court cases on, for instance, the free speech clause in the First Amendment, right? Like that piece of the Constitution has been litigated over and over and over and over and over again. You can't say that for Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and you certainly can't say that at the Supreme Court level. There's very, very few cases. So a lot of the work that has been done on what it means and the history surrounding it and why it was passed in the first place has been done by legal scholars and by historians. And in fact, some of the most recent debates that kind of spawned a lot of these cases, kind of sprung up in some of those scholarly circles, or kind of brought light to it. In fact, including by Michael Ludwig. Now, the fact that he's conservative and that there are Republicans who are also kind of weighing in on this case against Trump will have, I think, some extra value. But again, I really don't think this case is too much about Republican versus Democrat. I don't think this is partisan. This is about whether or not we can have free and fair elections, whether the hallmark of American democracy, which is the peaceful transfer of power, will protect Americans for the next century or two, or whether we are going to descend into authoritarianism. Right? It's almost, in a way, it's not even about Trump. This is about whether or not America survives as a pluralist democracy. That's what we're talking about, the survival of the republic. And so, I mean, I do think there is a lot of value in some of these briefs. I would really draw people's attention to some of the historians' briefs here, because those briefs are pretty remarkable. And they some of the historians have given interviews leading up to this, and they've been expert witnesses in this case at various levels. And they're like, yeah, when we saw January 6th, the first thing we thought of was Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Like we knew this is what was coming, and we kind of wondered why it took everybody so long. And in fact, Jill Lepore, who's one of my favorite writers, who's also a historian, wrote a brief in the case that I would draw everybody's attention to that I think could have an impact. But there are, I didn't get a final count of the briefs, and I did not have a chance to read them all, including the one that you mentioned. But Michael Ludwig has been writing about this particular aspect, or this particular challenge, the challenge to Trump's ability to be on the ballot under this Section 3 of the 14th Amendment for a while. And generally, I think he's right on in what he says. So I would not be surprised if I agree with most of what he's got in his brief there. Is that a fair answer for your question, Mary?
Yes, I think what he says is very strong, and to use Matt's language, I mean, you can massage these to interpret what you want it to mean, or is the text clearly written so that it's not up for debate
We didn't go over the text at the beginning, but I here, hang on. I have slightly edited copies, so it's a little wordy. The clauses bounce back and forth, but the operative stuff of the 14th Amendment says this. Okay, it says no person shall hold any office, civil or military, under the United States, who, having previously taken an oath as an officer of the United States to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. And then there's actually a last sentence that is likely going to come up in oral argument that I think is kind of important. It says, but Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such a disability. Okay? And the reason that is important is because one of Trump's main arguments is that the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is not self-executing, which is just a fancy way of saying that there had to be another law passed to give it any kind of legal effect. Okay? But if Congress had to pass a law to give it any kind of legal effect, why did they include a way to remove the disability in the 14th Amendment itself? Right? Why include that phrase, Congress can remove by 2/3 of a vote such disability? Because it had immediate effect, because it was self-executing. And in fact, everybody at the time understood it as self-executing. There's a bunch of the insurrectionists, the Confederate soldiers, when this was passed, started asking immediately for the removal of their disqualification from public office. So we know it had immediate effect, despite what some courts have, or what some people have argued. So I mean, I read that language as pretty darn clear. I don't think it's hard to understand. You can't be president if you, quote, engaged in insurrection. And Donald Trump did just that on January 6th. That is what this one court found. I think the conclusion is inescapable that he is ineligible for office again.
Okay, so if the Supreme Court does take up the D.C. appeals findings and their 57-page, very well written reasons why, that they gave, can Judge Chutkan set her date in Washington, D.C. before the Supreme Court comes back with their answer if he has immunity? Can she set her date?
So good question. And this is, I think, probably the most confusing thing. And I actually saw some legal scholars and some attorneys get this wrong based on what they were reading. So there's two things that are going to happen that Trump is going to ask of the Supreme Court. He's going to ask the court to stay the district court's opinion, to push the pause button. Okay, he has to do that by Monday. If he doesn't do that by Monday, the court's decision goes into effect, and Judge Chutkan, which is the trial judge, can start planning for the trial and start moving that ahead. Okay, he's almost certainly going to do that, so it's going to stay on pause. He's also going to be asking the court to take the case, okay, to accept and review the case that the DC Circuit is doing. And those are two different questions that the Supreme Court is going to have to tangle with. The court's going to answer the stay question more quickly. It will be on hold. The DC Circuit's opinion will be on hold while the court is considering the stay. And then once the court decides the stay, either for or against, that'll be the answer for whether or not it's off pause. Okay. Then the other question is the court going to take the case or not? And those decisions are probably not going to be given to us at the same time. And we don't know how they're going to overlap yet. If the court decides, yes, we are going to take this case, then Judge Chutkan's trial will be on pause until there's a resolution, which will almost certainly be past the election. If the Supreme Court decides it's not going to take the case, which I think, and I kind of hope it does, and might be its way out of
me too. Me too.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Then Judge Chutkan's case will go. Judge Chutkan's trial, Jack Smith's case, will go forward. Does that answer it? It is super confusing. I will be the first to admit. And things will be a lot clearer on Monday close of business. Monday afternoon, Monday evening, things will be, I think, a lot clearer. We'll have a little bit better clarity, and certainly by the end of next week, we'll have even more clarity, I think.
Okay, and is there anything Jack Smith can do with Judge Cannon in Florida with her dragging her feet on the documents? I mean, she's I don't know if the word is incompetent or
she's
biased.
testing Hanlon's razor. Bias is a good word for it. You're not supposed to attribute to malice what can be attributed to incompetence, but I think she's testing that proposition. Just generally, she was unqualified to be a judge. And that's not Andrew's opinion. She was rated as unqualified to be a judge by the ABA. She should not have been nominated. She certainly should not have been confirmed. And she is proving that true every single day. I think Jack Smith's hands are tied for the most part. There are probably a few extreme options that he couldn't really do, but maybe I think that his hands are tied. I would not expect much movement on that, unfortunately. Also, I will say,
he could find
Mary, let me also say that's when I was talking about flooding the zone, that's one of those cases that I haven't paid attention to in several weeks. So take everything I'm saying here in relation to that case with a grain of salt, please.
Yeah, because she's dragging her feet. What can you say on it? But
that's true. Yeah.
So, but also with the Section 3, has Trump been found guilty of an insurrection yet?
Oh, I really like this question, and I think this one is important, because that's not a question that has any relevance or bearing on what is happening in Colorado, right? Donald Trump is not being put on a criminal trial for insurrection in the state of Colorado. The only question in Colorado is whether or not Donald Trump meets the basic requirements of eligibility for that public office. Okay? So it is not a question of guilt or innocence. It is not a criminal question at all, right? It's a question of, just like whether or not he has served 2 terms, whether or not he was born in the United States, whether or not he's lived in the country for 14 years, right? That is the only question in the case. This is not a question of crime and punishment. This is a question of whether or not somebody is qualified for public office. So you don't have to be found guilty of anything to be disqualified from the ballot, right? And in fact, that may not be a disqualification. There are things you could be guilty of and still run for public office that would not disqualify you. Now, if you're asking about due process, okay, if you're asking about you're not actually asking about crime and punishment or guilt and innocence, but you're asking about, did he get some sort of due process? He absolutely did. The Colorado court in this case held a trial. That trial lasted for 5 days, and then there was another day for closing statements, so 6 days of trial. There were hundreds of exhibits put up at the trial. In fact, at the end of the trial, Trump's team introduced Exhibit 1083. The transcript for the trial runs to over 2,100 pages. Trump put on witnesses. Trump put on evidence. Trump rested his case early. Okay? He had all the due process he could want. And at the end of that trial, the court found that Trump had, quote, engaged in insurrection. Okay? Again, the 14th Amendment doesn't say convicted of insurrection because it's not a criminal statute. This is a baseline qualification for holding public office. If you took an oath to protect the Constitution and you violate the oath, you don't get to hold public office again. Not about crime and punishment. I hope that helps. It's a really common misconception.
But he said he didn't take the oath. He didn't really take the oath.
Well, that's slightly different. That's a different argument that they're making in the case, which is frankly ridiculous. Yes, but it is maybe a way out for the court.
Yeah. Okay. you answered a lot of my questions during your discussion, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Matt, for having Andrew on again. I will always call when he's on.
I have to do the least amount of work.
Thank you for taking my call.
Thanks, Mary.
This is the thing. You give a lawyer a captive audience. It's like, just wind me up and I'll go.
I have to do very, very little work when Andrew's here, as long as the questions are about legal stuff and maybe even more. We'll see. There are other questions coming in, but as always, theists are going to get priority here. I've already done the announcement, so I want to start with Ryan in Oklahoma. Is a theist with a question or an issue. Welcome. You're on with Matt and Andrew.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Andrew. How's it going?
Hey, Ryan.
Not bad.
Yeah, I don't really have much else to find. Does it say on your end what it is? I honestly don't know. This is like my first time to call in.
It says this is not your first time calling in, but it says, is looking for one example where matter produces information and adds it into the gene.
Yeah, just an example of that. I was watching a video, and I think it was Richard Dawkins. They asked him this question, and he just kind of like blanked. So I was just
No, he didn't. No, he didn't. No, he didn't.
They could answer this question.
No, he didn't. So that clip, what happened is, Dawkins had been lured into a discussion with creationists unknowingly. And when they asked this question, he realized that he was dealing with creationists, and he paused to think about how best to handle them after they had been duplicitous in getting him there to do that. This is from 2003 or whatever. He's addressed this many times, but he didn't remotely blank. But let's assume for a second, before I answer your question, that nobody could ever provide an example of matter producing information. Let's say nobody's ever given any example of it. What difference would that make to the creationist position or the evolutionist position?
Wouldn't it matter to the evolutionist?
It wouldn't matter to either. The inability or the fact that nobody's demonstrated where matter has produced information doesn't mean that matter hasn't produced information. It doesn't tell you about whether or not it happened. Whether or not somebody can give an example of something does not mean that it didn't happen. However, there are loads of examples. As a matter of fact, if you do a PubMed search for genetic duplication, you're going to find more than 3,000 references. And every instance of genetic duplication is an instance of adding information to the genome. Anytime that, and by the way, DNA genetic mutation can subtract information from the genome, things like fusing. And so that's what happens with chromosome 2. Which when you look at us compared to our other great ape cousins, there's a fusing of the second chromosome. That is a decrease, I suppose you could say, in information because the genome is a chromosome smaller. But any duplication is also an increase in information. And there are genomes that are significantly, like I think a banana has more chromosomes than we do. And so it's really difficult to talk about information and what is or isn't being added. And the creationists are just saying, oh, well, that's not information. Oh, that's not information. No, that's not information. And the reality is if you go to talkorigins.org and go to the index to creationist claims, this one's up there with 14 independent references talking about increased genetic variation of population from a study, Linsky in 1995, increased genetic material, Alvis et al. In 2001, novel genetic material from Knox et al. In 1996, novel genetic regulated abilities from Prajambata in 1995, two enzymes in the histidine biosynthesis pathway that are barrel-shaped structures and sequence events suggest were formed via gene duplications and fusion of two half-barrel ancestors. That's Lang in 2000. And there's just link after link after link. So when we're talking about can matter increase and add information to a genome, the answer is absolutely yes. It can also subtract. And some of the information that might be added may not be relevant to anything. It may be superfluous information, or it's even removing it could create something where it is more suited to evolve. But as I said at the beginning, or to change, as I said at the beginning, even if there were no examples, that wouldn't in any way favor creationist claims. But the fact that there are thousands of examples, and this has been discussed to death, it definitely does not help creationist claims. But I would recommend the best place to dig in on this. I mean, I'm happy to continue the discussion, but the best place to dig in on this is like Skeptalk with Forrest or Erica or Aron or anybody else. But what's your response to what I said so far?
Oh, I was just going to say thank you for clearing it up, that the rest of that clip, because, you know, it gets cut off in most things that you see on YouTube anyway. But,
yeah, they edited it. I actually, when I think Richard and I talked about this in one of the events that we did about getting ambushed. It just like there's this documentary that's called What the Bleep Do We Know? And you're going to find some rather impressive secular scientists who aren't into any sort of woo at all. And yet a bunch of them just got completely duped into sitting down for an interview with this wild pseudoscience pushing thing of, you know, stuff like The Secret and all these things that have, it's just bizarre. But anyway, that's a distraction from that. But I hope that gives you some information, Ryan. And I would also recommend when you have questions about things you've heard with regard to creationist claims, I would go to talkorigins.org. They have an index to creationist claims that is robust, well documented, been up there for years. People are constantly working on it. And you can do a search for any claim and get multiple linked references with scientists explaining, hey, this isn't what the creationists say it is, or in some cases saying, yeah, this is exactly what they're saying, but here's this aspect here. And there's so many things that we don't know, but we have a pretty good understanding of the basics of biology, but there's still tons more to learn. And at no point in the history of the world has scientific exploration added 1 millimeter of confirmation to anything any creationist has ever put forward in favor of creationism.
I might also just add, Ryan, I mean, I like it, Matt. But I mean, Ryan, like, I would just also add, like, it might be worth mentioning to the folks you chat about this with, or that are in your sort of circles that are pushing these forward, you know, tell them about that video and tell them that it's doctored and tell them that it's edited and to stop using it and take it down. You know, this is one of the things that I think, I know I've seen Matt try to do it. I try to do it. You know, the thing that it comes up, what I'm thinking of on our side is sometimes there'll be founding fathers quotes, right?
Yeah.
That are not accurate, but, you know, might show that the United States was not founded as a Christian nation. And when one of those pops up, somebody replies to me, I'm like, hey, you know, James Madison didn't say that. That's not a bad quote. You should not be using that meme. Stop. And people are like, oh, okay, that's great. And I would really love to see the other side do some of that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Matt, I just have like one more question, and it can be like a short answer. It doesn't have to be long and elaborated, so you can get to some other callers. But I just wanted to clarify with something that you were saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth or anything, so please correct me if you didn't say this. But whenever we were talking about the first question, so are you saying that there is an example that I could find on the website that you gave me where matter itself creates DNA and then creates like an organism? Is that what you were saying?
Where matter creates DNA and an organism. So
right,
organism,
right, because that's how it had to have been done, because it had matter and then it produced DNA. Like, I'm just curious, like, where that is on any of those websites you showed me.
Sure. So the question you said you were asking is, you wanted one example where matter produces information. That happens in genetic duplication. That's one example. Now you're asking, hey, are we able to confirm how self-replicating DNA began? Or basically you're no longer asking about just merely evolution or matter increasing information, but now you're wanting us to say, hey, can we confirm abiogenesis? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, maybe we went a wrong direction with it at first. I mean, you answered I mean, the information you gave me at first was great, but I think this was more towards where I was going with the first question.
It's going to be similar. So let's say, for example, that we don't have any explanation for abiogenesis. We don't know how life began, or we have no way to confirm how life began, which is pretty much the state of things right now. We don't have a confirmed full understanding of abiogenesis specifically for life on Earth and us, or the origins of life as it is on Earth. Is it directed panspermia? The sort of alien hypothesis. Is it panspermia, accidental, where you've got an asteroid out there with this other? We don't know how life began, so we don't currently have an explanation for abiogenesis. The absence of an explanation for abiogenesis does not also does not in any way bolster the case for creationism. There's plenty of things that we don't know, and also this is an incredibly difficult thing to study, but there are people who've studied this, and there are a number of different hypotheses and a demonstration that something like abiogenesis is not only possible but probable under certain conditions. You go back to something like the Miller-Urey experiments, and the number one objection is, well, the Miller-Urey experiments didn't produce the right type of amino acids and wasn't an accurate model of the ancient Earth. And I think both of those are reasonable objections to some extent. But what the Miller-Urey experiments showed is that under some conditions, irrespective of whether or not they match the specific conditions on Earth and the specific outcome on Earth, they did demonstrate that the building blocks of life can begin from non-life. How it specifically happened in our case, we still don't know, and people are still working on it. But there's a whole section on that same page that I was referencing, with a number of different articles on abiogenesis, including things addressing the odds of life forming, left-handed amino acids, and abiogenesis, and whether or not it's just speculation. Or what we know is that evolution, the theory of evolution by means of natural selection, is the model that addresses the diversity of life after life begins. Abiogenesis deals with how does life begin? And we have a number of different potential models, whether it's coming from undersea or on an asteroid or whatever else. But we don't know exactly how it happened in our case. But there's no reason to think that it is so impossible or extraordinary that it would warrant people to reach to magical supernatural sources.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Matt, for answering the question. Just one more thing, and I promise that this is it. But you just mentioned something about building blocks. What was it? Yep. What did you say? The building blocks? What was it called?
I don't remember exactly what I said, but abiogenesis deals with, the Miller-Urey experiments demonstrated that self-replicating amino acids and things like that what would be the building blocks that leads to something like DNA are possible under purely mechanical condition.
Yeah, you said it was found like in nature, like all of that was found in nature, right? Is what you said?
Well, no, what I'm saying is that what we know from the experiment so far is that there's no reason to think that this is so extraordinary that it would warrant anybody reaching for supernatural things. So for example, life probably, given the size of the universe, life has probably arisen all over the universe at different times. It's possible we're the first, but the exact process of how it happened here, we don't know. I don't know if I'm answering your question. What was it you were looking for clarification on?
Ryan, I'll just also say, Ryan, it's okay not to know, man. Like, it's okay not to know things. It's okay to say I don't know. Like, I know certainty is comforting sometimes, but it's okay.
Yeah, for sure. But no, Matt, sorry I was being a little confusing. I know that I've heard in the past people say something about the building block life were found in nature or something like that.
Yeah, the specific chemistry, the specific chemistries or chemical interactions that allow for self-replicating things like self-replicating RNA, et cetera. Those building blocks of life seem to be abundant in the universe. And so it would be unsurprising to find that life might have also arisen somewhere else independently, or that life rose somewhere else and traveled to Earth on an asteroid or underneath the sea and sea vents. You just get the chemistry that under the right conditions leads to this. The big thing is we still don't know. And until we know, we're going to keep looking. And that's what makes science so much better than creationism, because creationism doesn't have a way to demonstrate. It's like, it's either revealed information, which you can't confirm, or we're stuck. Creation science isn't science. It doesn't have any path to demonstrating it.
I was just thinking that, so I was a neuroscience major in undergrad and I took organic chemistry and all this, and I'm having like these wonderful flashbacks, like, because science it is so cool. Like the idea, like we don't really know how life began on this planet, and we've been trying to figure it out. And we've got these great hypotheses and we've got these pathways that we've figured out where we think it could happen, where you have sort of these self-replicating matrices and minerals going into, like, it's so cool that this is like the things that we get to figure out and we are trying to learn. And Ryan, I just like, sometimes it makes me so sad because like you're trying to like win this argument to prove this thing that's out there, and it's like there's so much more richness and there's so much cool stuff out here that, like, if you can just look at that and look at the amazing endeavor that we are engaged in at accumulating more knowledge. I mean, science is so cool and amazing. Sorry. Anyway.
All good. I'm glad I could create a good conversation for being the first caller. Cool. So I hope you guys have some good calls the rest of the night.
Thanks,
and have a good rest of your night.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate you. Yeah, it's I mean, obviously, I think the next call is, by the way, not going to have anything to do with the law either. It'll be about.
I mean, I love this. Yeah.
Yeah. So we get to dig on that. Andrew gets to step out of lawyer mode to engage in one of the other things we're passionate about. It's interesting to me. I've relied on talkorigins.org, great site. The index to creationist claims is, I just. Like, if you're not aware of that resource, you just have to. And you're not likely to find much in the way of creationist claims that aren't addressed there at some point. And as Andrew pointed out, sometimes the answer is, I don't know. It's more about a humility and a recognition that, hey, we don't have all the answers yet. But the fact that we're still looking and will continue to look, and how much we've already discovered, you could look at the universe and go, gosh, we know so much about the universe compared to what we knew 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago. And that's true. And yet you're still not quite at a vanishingly small, but an incredibly nearly vanishingly small percentage of what you could know. But it's not about what percentage of what you could know, because what's the size of this grain of sand on, Neptune? That's not useful knowledge, probably. But knowing the makeup of the different planets, the likely paths that planets might form from an accretion disk, and how this star system or this planetary system is different from this other one. I've talked before, just from a standpoint of reason, that once upon a time, the reasonable conclusion based on observation and evidence was that the sun orbited around Earth. That made sense given the available information. And that model would have held up at some point. But then you find out things that you didn't know before. When you start finding the things that don't make sense with your model, then you continue that exploration to say, okay, is there a different model? And this is where you get into things like, kind of Platonic notions, or whether or not your physics model works at really grand scales and really small scales, or does it work just at this scale? Because if you're going to build a building, you can operate with a flat Earth model, because when you build a building, that portion of the Earth is going to be made flat for the building. And so all of your math can work on a flat surface because you're going to make it that way. Plus, even if you didn't make it that way, in the tiny little space where you're going to build a building, things like water finding its own level, there's a natural sort of leveling out thing that's going to happen. If you just start putting, stones on the ground, you're either going to build something that's going to fall apart, or you're going to work together towards something that's level. You could not build a level wall that runs entirely across the United States, because despite what some people think, the Earth is not flat. It is in fact curved, and the structure that you would need to support that on the east and west coast is just, I haven't done the math. Anyway, I'm just riffing on how cool.
But I mean, I also just like to me, it's like, and this is trying. I don't want to be condescending to anybody at all, but like, I get a little sad when I hear those, like, if the answer is God, like that's so boring in a way, and it there's so much wonder and beauty in not only not knowing, but in pursuing the answer, versus just being certain in this answer that is, supposed to answer every single question out there with these three letters. There's so much beauty in science, in the pursuit of that knowledge. I was talking with the kids the other day and explaining to them, they're learning about stars and astronomy, and they're learning about exploding stars, and I'm explaining to them how cool it is that, like, we are made of star stuff. And watching them take in that information and all it means, there's so much amazing beauty and numinous that comes out of this view of life.
Anyway. Yeah, we seem to have lost a theistic caller that was on hold for an hour that I was just getting ready to go to, who wanted to argue for the necessity of God. I think it was somebody we previously had a conversation about with.
I think I'll just take that as basically what I was saying right there answered their questions, I think is what happened probably, Matt. Yeah. Okay.
I think, I don't know. I think. Let's get this next caller in, because this is, so Jeff, pronouns are he, him, has a question for you about the Supreme Court tomorrow. So.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, indeed.
Good deal. Hey, hi, Matt. Love your show. Watch you every week. But thanks, I have Jeff. A question for Andrew.
What can I do for you?
I am superfluous and happy about it.
Oh, Matt, you are my God. Sorry. Anyway, but Andrew, my question is this. Could the Supreme Court accept the Colorado decision, yet call on Congress for the 2/3 vote you were talking about earlier?
So let me pull back up the language so I can read that for everybody. So the 2/3 vote, so everybody remembers, what Jeff is talking about is the last sentence of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. It says Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such a disability. That is, remove the fact that somebody who committed insurrection is now disqualified from office. They could remove that disability, and that person could be eligible for office again. Congress has done this in the past. They did it on sort of a case-by-case basis. All those individuals petitioned Congress themselves. I am not aware of an instance where the court directed Congress to do something. The court could not, and if I don't apologize, maybe that wasn't the word you used, Jeff. The court couldn't direct Congress to do anything. The court could suggest it, but even that, I think the court's unlikely to do, given the separation of powers. The court might mention it. I think that's about the best they would do. Trump could certainly ask Congress to remove that disability. The problem with doing that is that he would essentially be admitting that he is disqualified from the ballot if he were to do that. And then he also doesn't get that vote because there's no way he's got the votes for that in both. He needs 2/3 of both the House and the Senate, right? And that ain't happening. So it's a really interesting sentence in the 14th Amendment, but it is not going to come into play in terms of actually being used any time probably in what we're talking about for Donald Trump. I think it will come up in argument tomorrow, and it will likely be used to argue that the 14th Amendment is, or the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is self-executing almost certainly. But other than that, I don't see it having that big a role. Does that answer your question, Jeff?
Yeah, it answers my question.
Okay.
But as wishy-washy as the Supreme Court is, I figured it might come into play.
Well, so here's, if you're really curious about what the Supreme Court might do and how they might wiggle out of this, which is kind of what I'm also hearing you ask. I'm happy to riff on that. I mean, there's a lot we could talk about there. Trump's main argument now, the main focus of his merits brief, is whether or not Section 3 of the 14th Amendment applies to the president. Essentially, he's saying it does not apply to the president at all. And I think the reason that Trump focused on it so much in his merits brief, and I think is because he thinks it would be attractive to the court, not Trump, his lawyers. And it would be attractive to the court, probably to the conservatives on the court, for a few reasons. One, it would hand Trump a win. Two, it would decide the issue and it would squash all the litigation, right? So what Matt was talking about at the beginning, having all the patchwork different states deciding this, so it would be a final answer. And it avoids the inescapable factual conclusion that Trump did, in fact, engage in insurrection, as all the facts show. So the court gets to avoid all of that and give Trump in a win in a way that they might think has sort of a lesser long-term impact, right? I mean, Section 3 has never been applied by this court to disqualify a president. It's only been applied to a handful of politicians in our history. None of them were president. So the justices might think, look, this is unlikely to repeat. So there's also this sort of slightly devious piece of the argument that they're, and this Mary alluded to this earlier in the call. They're not really arguing that all presidents are exempt from the 14th Amendment, just Donald Trump, because unlike every other president and really every other politician in our history, Donald Trump never held any other office, right? So he's never taken any other oath, only the presidential oath, which they argue does not apply under the 14th Amendment. Essentially, the president does not come under the umbrella of the 14th Amendment. It would not be somebody who is disqualified. That's why Trump's team focus on it. The court could settle a lot in Trump's favor by going that route. On the actual question, I think it's insane. I think it's an insane argument. The purpose is to disqualify traitors from holding public office, and it didn't apply to the most powerful office in the country. It didn't apply to the commander-in-chief of our armed forces, right? We don't want traitors in any position, from the cabinet to the Senate to the House to the governor to the dog catcher, but go ahead and give the traitor control of the Army and the Navy and the Marines. It's nuts. And I think most historians agree that it's nuts. But anyway, it's because Section 3 does not mention the president explicitly. that they are making this argument that they have this hook. And there is a chance that the court goes this route. And I mean, there are other reasons why this is a shitty argument. I guess if I were steel manning it, the more technical legal question is whether the phrase, quote, office under the United States includes president of the United States. Trump agreed that it's an office, but he's saying that it's not an office under the United States. That's what he did with the Colorado Supreme Court argument. There's like the impeachment clause, which says disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. We all know that the impeachment clause applies to the president. There's the religious test clause, one of my favorite clauses, one of the coolest clauses in the Constitution, which says that no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. That very clearly applies to the president and is like a perfect mirror of that same language. And then there's actually a moment in the debate over Section 3 of the 14th Amendment when one senator gets up and he's like, hey, I think this doesn't go far enough, because insurrections might be elected president or vice president, and we seem to have left them out. And another senator gets up and he's like, bro, let me call your attention to the words "or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States." And the first senator is like, oh, my bad, I was wrong. That's in the congressional record for 1866. We know it happened. So on the merits, it's a terrible, terrible, terrible argument, but I think it's going to be very, very attractive to the justices because it is sort of this way out that allows them to do a lot of the things they want to do in a way that is I'll just leave it there. I think it's going to be it's a very shiny object for those conservative justices. Let me leave it like that. Does that help, Jeff?
Absolutely. Also, if America decides to elect this asshole, it'd be kind of like electing Benedict Arnold. It's in the same realm.
Yeah, I think that's a perfectly fair argument. Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, I'll let you go. I know you have lots of calls. And Matt, keep it up. Love your arguments. My best friend hates you, by the way, and I love it. Talk to you later.
Your best friend hates me?
I know you're going to sign off.
He doesn't. Well, I argue with him in religion all the time and politics. We go back to the second grade, so we pretty much clash on everything except for our friendship.
You should write a book about how you're managing to stay friends through the past 5 or 6 years. I think a lot of those friendships have fallen apart recently. You got religion and politics, and you're sticking together. That's impressive. That's impressive.
I know. His mom hates me too because I'm a traitor to America.
Yeah.
Anyway, bye guys.
All right.
Bye, Jeff.
See you later. Thanks so much.
Yep.
We are queuing up some additional calls. By the way, if we don't get calls that are specifically calling in, if there's not a theistic caller that wants to have a discussion or somebody who's got specific questions, for Andrew, we will probably move on to the super chat portion. So if you've got questions that you wanted to get in via super chat, we're going to read every super chat over $10 tonight. So if you've got questions for Andrew, we'll be digging on those. We have another Jennifer is calling from New Jersey with is asking for comments on the Supreme Court. So Jennifer, you're on with Andrew Seidel.
Jersey. Love it, Jennifer.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. I heard somebody recently, I'm not sure if you know well, you probably do. Wendy Parmet, law professor from Northeastern University. And she was on
sorry, go ahead, Jen. Sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
Sorry. She was talking about how the Roberts Court has been changing they've been reinterpreting the separation of church and state clause.
Oh, yeah.
It is much more like it used to be just we won't write the law unequally if you're for religions, and we'll apply the law equally or write it equally for everybody. And now they seem to be interpreting it as, well, we'll accommodate religion. and like they're going out of their way. Like you don't want to serve gay people. That's okay. So they're accommodating religion now, and that's not how it used to be interpreted. Not even Scalia would interpret it that way. So, can you comment on why why they're getting away with that?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a whole book about that, Jennifer. I wrote a book called American Crusade: How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. In fact, like, I mean, that's what they have been working. That's what they've been working to do. I mean, they're working to tear down the wall of separation and give the right kind of Christian, I should do this, the right kind of Christian, which is, a conservative, white, cis, het, Christian man, this special privileged status under the law at the expense of everybody else. I mean, that is like one of the primary goals of the conservative legal movement for the last 40 years. I mean, that's why the book is titled American Crusade. I mean, it is shocking how far they have gone down that road. I mean, to essentially, in some cases, saying that the separation of church and state violates the free exercise clause, which, if you know your law, the court in the past has cited the separation of church and state and religious freedom in the first two clauses of the First Amendment. So the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's one sentence, two clauses. And essentially what the Supreme Court has been saying is that first part of that sentence, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, violates the second part of the sentence, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, which is an insane argument. I mean, it is bonkers, but that's where they've come down. And Justice Sonia Sotomayor points this out in her dissent in the Carson versus Macon case from 2022, out of Maine. She says we're at a point where the separation of church and state is a constitutional violation now. It's nuts. Yeah, I mean, we're in a really bad spot, and a lot of the things that we are seeing, a lot of the rights that we are losing, a lot of the harm that we are seeing is because we are losing the separation of church and state and kind of getting a real world lesson in what it's like to live in a country without that.
Yep.
Yeah, she mentioned that OSHA was had their hands tied during the epidemic because of this. They couldn't protect workers.
Yeah, so I have this is a chapter that I have in American Crusade where I talk about this during the pandemic, and you can actually pinpoint when the court shifted, because it was when Amy Coney Barrett was put onto the court. The court changed from saying no, religion and religious freedom is not a license to risk the life and health and safety of everybody else in your community, to put an extra burden on the hospital system in your community. To do any of those things, you have to play by the rules just like anybody else. To saying no, any burden on people's religious freedom violates that religious freedom, even in the middle of a pandemic. And those people have a right to risk your health, your safety, your life, the life of your kid. That's where we are. And it dates to, I mean, it was just a couple weeks after Amy Coney Barrett was put on the court, on the eve of Thanksgiving, in fact. The court completely changed course and overturned more than a century of precedent. Like, and we didn't talk about it enough. We lost Roe versus Wade. There's a lot of other really strong precedent that we have lost that started with church-state separation. It was the canary in the coal mine.
The right to get medical care infringes on somebody else's right to practice religion somehow.
Yeah, I mean, that's the Hobby Lobby case. I mean, that's what you've just pointed out, and that's been spreading. I mean, that case was in 2014, right? Employees at a business had a legal right to contraception under the Affordable Care Act, and the Supreme Court took that away because a group of people owned interest in a trust, and the trust owned interest in another trust, which owned interest in the Hobby Lobby corporation. And that corporation then had the filtered through the religion layers of legal protection down to the corporation, then down to the employees of that corporation, and yanked that right away from them. It was disgusting. And it happened in the name of religious freedom. And then things have gotten worse since then. And that was 10 years ago. The Hobby Lobby decision was 10 years ago now. It got a chapter on that in An American Crusade, too. So here, just so... You said you've read it, Jennifer, but if people haven't read it, there it is. Please go. Yeah, it's a hard read, unfortunately. Normally I'd like to tell people happy reading, but it's not. So anyway,
Leo's got a lot to answer for.
What's that, Scalia?
Leo, Leonard.
Oh, Leo, yes, Leonard Leo, yes, for sure, absolutely, you're right.
I thought we were making a West Wing reference for a second, and I was like,
oh yeah.
I'm a huge, like, I've seen every episode of West Wing like 10 times. So, all right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer.
I appreciate.
Thank you, Jennifer.
I will say that it gets a little confusing on occasion when I think about a legal issue or a church-state separation issue or a government issue. Sometimes I have to ask myself, am I remembering something from the West Wing, or did this happen in reality?
They really nailed it. The West Wing really nailed a few things. Yeah, on like church-state separation, they had a couple like really good storylines about that.
There was one that stuck with me. Just a comment, which has always annoyed the shit out of me, and despite the fact that I would absolutely support President Bartlett in reality on a number of issues. So Bartlett, and I've probably talked about this 20 times before, Bartlett and Charlie are walking essentially from the West Wing back to the residence. And Charlie's basically asking how this thing that just happened, how does this not violate church-state separation? And Bartlett does this. Charlie starts the question, and Bartlett's like, how does it not violate church separation? It does, but sometimes you just say, what the hell? Yeah. And I was like, no, but I mean, it's within the context of the show and the context of reasonable compromise, it all makes sense. And yet there's a part of me that's just like, no, there can be no compromise on this, because we've seen, it's not just a slippery slope argument. We've seen what the fuck happens when you give them an inch. You give them an inch and they take a light year.
No, I mean, that really is true. And it's true legally speaking, because you can trace a lot of the modern decisions back to these sort of minor quote unquote violations of the Constitution, including things like "In God We Trust" is the national motto, and "Under God" added to the Pledge of Allegiance. And when I say you can trace them, I mean you can look at Supreme Court opinions, and the court will point to that and be like, "Well, look, we already do this, so maybe it's okay." It obviously can't violate the separation of church and state because we already do these things. It's terrible reasoning, and it's not the way the law is supposed to work. But it often happens, and I've written about it in a couple different times, a couple different places. It's one of the more frustrating things. It is, in fact, that is a decent representation of how the Supreme Court deals with these issues, though, or did deal with them.
If the world made sense, I would. Like, I understand the value of compromise, and I like the value of compromise. There are things, though, that I can't support compromise on because we've seen the track record. This, by the way, I'm pretty sure that Charlie was asking about the prayer breakfast. And I look at it, I'm not going to get into anything specific, but there are specific definitions with regard to sexual harassment, sexual assault, things like that. And this meme that I saw about with like a bunch of comment, I mentioned it the other day. They were talking about back when guys were just catcalling women and wolf whistling, and there were a bunch of women commenting on this thing about how they wish they could go back to those days, and that evidently there's some women who would appreciate, and I think that there might have been a time where what is clearly sexual harassment was and potentially was potentially rightly viewed as, okay, where's the actual harm? Like, who has been wronged here? You know, is this just free speech? Is this just free expression? And then we went from, hey, we could potentially have some compromise and you could talk, you know, you talk out of your ass about boys being boys or whatever else, to then recognizing what the actual harm is, the harm that we were ignoring, the harm that we were overlooking with regard to how it impacts people's daily lives, how safe they feel in society, how productive they can be if they're in a hostile environment and all this other stuff. We learned more. And that's why this changed from something that we can just like, you know, did you really hurt anybody? Or, you know, two dudes get into a fist fight. There was a cop that came to my house after during COVID, somebody threatened me while I was in my truck and punched my truck. And I called the cops and they came out and they were like, well, is there damage to the truck? No. Then there's nothing we can do. And I'm like, okay, but there's nothing we can, I mean, there's nothing, you know, this guy's threatening me. There's nothing that can be done. And he's like, you know, sometimes you just got to let people fight. And I was like, get the fuck off my property. I don't care if you are no longer allowed to be here on my property. You are not a public servant. You are not helping. You are sitting here telling me you wish we could go back to the days when you could just fisticuffs sort it out. Get the fuck off my property. And they left because they weren't going to do anything for me anyway. But
well, can we talk about the prayer breakfast for a second too? Because that happens.
We can. I have two callers with specific questions for you, but do the prayer breakfast real quick.
Well, I mean, I will say, like, the prayer breakfast is Charlie is right to ask the question in the West Wing, and it's the prayer breakfasts have been plagued by scandal since its beginning. It is a relic, a scar from a previous wave of Christian nationalism in the 1950s, when we did get "In God We Trust" adopted as the motto, when we got "Under God" added to the pledge, we get the National Prayer Breakfast, we get the National Day of Prayer. All these things come up in the 1950s, and it's not, as we often say, just a blowback against godless communism. It's also big business uniting with Christian nationalist clergymen around the country to push back on the big deal. Essentially, big business funding Christian nationalist preachers to overturn all of the gains and progress that we made in the New Deal, which I think I said big deal because my brain is frayed, but I meant the New Deal. And Kevin Cruz does a great write-up of this in his book. I recounted a little bit in one of my chapters in The Founding Myth. It's the first time we see that alliance that still exists today, and one of the reasons that Leonard Leo has so much money to capture the courts. Anyway, that's when you get the prayer breakfast. And since that time, it has been plagued by scandal, right? It's an influence peddling bazaar, I think is what the New York Times called it. It's a way for conservative Christians and Christian nationalists, like the group that was behind it called The Family, to wield power and to give people access to power. And it's got this awful strain of anti-LGBTQ hatred running through it. In fact, the chair of last year's prayer breakfast was flown to Uganda by The Family to urge them to support the what people might know as the Kill the Gays bill there, that awful anti-LGBTQ bill that put up death penalty for LGBTQ folks. And that's the prayer breakfast. And because it was plagued by scandal, Congress decided to take it over, at least partially. So this year, it was held not at a private hotel as it had been for every other year past. They moved it to the Capitol Visitor Center last year, which is problematic. And this year, inside the Capitol itself, inside Statuary Hall, the beating heart of American democracy. Every prayer was Christian. Every speaker was Christian. Beginning to end Christian. Representative Jared Huffman, the founder of the Free Thought Caucus and the only open, unaffiliated member of Congress when it comes to religion, went as a quiet protest and was, he can speak for himself on it, but it was a truly truly problematic event. And alongside that, right with it, was another event that Mike Johnson, our new speaker, organized at the Museum of the Bible, which was even worse. In terms of the rhetoric, I mean, just pure Christian nationalists. We have to take over the country. Pure anti-LGBTQ hatred. Whereas, like, you have Biden at least, not going that route in his speech, but doing it in the Capitol. And the end goal here, to me at least, is very, very clear. Mike Johnson is trying to bring the event that he hosted at the Museum of the Bible into the Capitol. Like, that's what he wants the National Prayer Breakfast to be, and give him a couple more years. That's what it's going to be. It's going to be in pure Christian nationalism, in the beating heart of American democracy. It was a Christian church service in the Capitol. That's what he wants to drag this country towards. Anyway, we get off and we can talk about callers.
Yeah, it's
bad. It's bad.
It's sad in some ways to be wishing that, people, one of the most common questions I've had over the years is, why do you got to address this stuff? Why can't you just let people believe what they believe? Why can't we just all just believe what we, and I'm like, I'm not disallowing people from believing what they believe. I'm engaging with the people who want to engage. I don't make outgoing calls. I let people call in. And I'm trying to convince people that they should have good reasons for their beliefs, that their beliefs have consequences, and that those consequences impact all of us. And so something as seemingly innocuous as, hey, let's have a prayer breakfast, would have been fine, would have been no big deal if it wasn't everything that Andrew just talked about it being. When this is the way you exercise and maintain your privilege, it is no longer an innocuous, hey, it's God. I got plenty of people in my life who believe in a God. I am friends with people who believe in a God. I have had wonderful discussions and debates with people who believe in God. I have been to church. I've been to more churches as an atheist than I did. I haven't been to church as often. I went to church more often when I was a believer, but I've been to more different churches from different religions as an atheist than I ever did when I was a believer. I'm happy. I'm going to be debating on Good Friday in Tampa, Florida, the resurrection in a church. I'm skipping the American Atheist National Convention on Easter weekend in order to be there in a church and engage with people and talk about this. I'm not in any way trying to disallow people. I would never legislate religion away. I know some atheists who would. I know some atheists who would love to make it illegal. I respect religious freedom and the freedom of conscience and individual autonomy and the sovereignty over one's mind too much to ever support the notion of making religion illegal. But I will absolutely work to make religious privilege illegal as fuck. And that's you've got to do that, to say, okay, you can have your religion, but you don't get to bludgeon people with it. You don't even get to look at people sideways with it, with any real seriousness, because we're gonna call you out on that and put limits.
Yeah, you're right. Your right to swing your fist ends at somebody else's nose, and your right to swing your religion ends where other people's rights begin too. Also, side note, I think Arden should take a note. Jimmy, I don't make outgoing calls, like, has merch potential. I'll just say that. I liked that.
I love it.
Sweet.
Anyway.
All right, let's get these last two calls for you. Ryan in Idaho has a question for you about Baker and website maker case. So, Ryan, you're on with Andrew.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Hello.
Oh my God.
So Ben, I've heard you guys talk about this in the past, and I'm kind of even more conflicted now. So just at the outset here, I am a ally of the LGBT community, so I just want to be clear about that. So nothing I say is misconstrued. I'm a small business owner. I'm a sole proprietor. I have no public facilities. I work by contract only. And I have a strongly held conviction that I don't want to contract with the KKK or the Proud Boys. and just kind of see some slippery slope arguments of some of this. So, Matt, if you'd deconstruct my argument, and Andrew, if you give me the law.
Yeah, well, first, you don't have anything to worry about because the KKK and the Proud Boys are not a protected class under any civil rights statute anywhere in the country, so you don't have to serve them.
And so that's kind of the slippery slope part is if, you know, like,
no, because you need a government somewhere willing to pass a law saying that the KKK is a protected class. Now, you might get somebody to pass a law saying that political affiliation is a protected class. But I mean, let's do two things. One, I'll talk a little bit about civil rights laws first. But Ryan, let me ask you this first: do you have an LLC?
Yes.
So you're incorporated in some way, shape, or form. And then
Correct.
You said you broke up a little bit for me. You don't have a place of business. What do you mean by that? Like you don't have a storefront? Do you have like what? You don't have a website? Like what does that mean?
No storefront, by contract only.
Okay. So what we need to talk about is a little bit about the way that civil rights laws work. I think a lot of the problem that people have when they hear about the Baker case, when they hear about the 303 creative case, is not understanding how basic anti-discrimination laws work. And generally, we have civil rights laws in this country. We have federal versions, we have state versions. And they're usually a series of laws that protect discrimination in employment, housing, advertising, right? People with disabilities. And then we have ones that protect in places of public accommodation is one of the phrases that's often used. These are the rules these are why buildings can't put up signs, no blacks and no Irish, and why stores can't do the same thing. Okay, that's the sort of like basic kind of example, and the simple sort of 2-word phrase that underlies all those laws is don't discriminate. But then you get to get into kind of the who and the when and the where, right? Because we do see signs at businesses that say, okay, no shirt, no shoes, no service, right? So that clearly discriminates against nudists. How can we allow that, right? Another thing that we saw, well, you mentioned one, but we often saw, for instance, in the bakery case that I'm thinking about, we saw these sort of gotcha analogies about Nazis and Jewish bakeries and bacon and kosher delis and the KKK and black-owned businesses. But the way that civil rights laws operate, yeah.
Can we cut a little into it more, direct to religion specifically, like Westboro Baptists? I don't believe in their ideology as their version of Christianity. I don't want to serve them. KKK that's a little more open. I get what you're saying about public accommodation and regular non-discrimination, but they have an ideology that I disagree with. I don't want to serve them.
But it's not just ideology. So that's the next step, right? Because the next step is that these laws list groups of people who are protected. Okay, and those groups of people are known as protected classes. So disability, race, creed, marital status, national origin, and then they list religion in a lot of them. And then they list businesses, places, services, and the like that those people can't be excluded from. So the question that you're asking, and what I'm trying to get at is, it does depend on where you are. There's federal law, there's state law, there's often local ordinances. So depending on where you are, there may be somebody in that protected class, and you may, depending on how your business is organized, fall under one of those places of public accommodation, one of those businesses, one of those services, which is often the case, that can't exclude people. So you could be in one of those instances. So you have to have a protected class that's actually protected, that place of public accommodation, and then a service that is being provided to others but is being denied to people in the protected class. That's the only time that those laws really kick in. And there's certainly an instance where, yeah, you could be having to serve a member of the Westboro Baptist Church, right? You might have already done that and not even know it, right? Like, I mean, that could easily have happened. Now, I think like one of the questions that you get into is like, well, what service are you providing? And be vague. I'm not trying to out you or anything like that here.
Event services.
Event services. Okay. So, let's try to think. Like you would host. I mean, weddings would be kind of the good example, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I mean, so generally, right? The KKK and Nazis, Proud Boys are easy. They're not a protected class under anyone. Bigots aren't protected class. Political affiliations not a protected class. The Westboro Baptist Church is a religion. They are certainly religious. Let's think of what an event would be that they might ask you to do. Go ahead.
I understand where you're going. Is there a slippery slope? And the two arguments sound awfully similar. My strongly held conviction is a similar argument towards, on the other side. And is there a slippery slope? Is there a free market aspect of this?
No. We don't have a free market. We have a regulated market, and that's a good thing. Also, Ryan, it's not you. It's your LLC, right? You have created a corporation that is organized and protected under the laws of the state in which you incorporated it in, right? It's not you. It's the corporation. And the corporation has all of these awesome legal protections that come along with it, right? If the corporation poisons somebody at one of the events that you're at, you are not going to be held liable, Ryan. Your savings are going to be safe, right? The corporation might get sued, it might go bankrupt, and you might lose that. Fine, but you are safe. I mean, the corporation's like it's one of the most remarkable human inventions out there, and both good and bad. But that is the entity that is being regulated here. And when you are organized and operating under the protection of the laws of, let's just say, the state of Colorado, because that's where the bakery and the website case took place, like there's a whole host of protections that you get, and a whole host of burdens that you willingly accept in return for those protections, right? Like you have to follow the health code if you're a restaurant. You have to follow all of the different environmental laws if you're a factory. There's all kinds of things that come along with licensing yourself as a business. And one of those things is obeying basic civil rights statutes, which means not discriminating against those protected classes of people. Right? I mean, like to me, and like the idea of so first of all, if you really are interested in this and you really want to do a deep dive both on the case, the bakery case, and like these laws more generally, in American Crusade, which I mentioned earlier, Chapter 5 is all about this stuff. And it really does dive deep both into that case and kind of this area of the law generally. But I don't think there is any sort of slippery slope argument here that is convincing. And I address the free speech stuff. I address the one that you mentioned earlier, the market and the free market stuff, which to me is kind of I think one of the more popular arguments, but is really, really misguided. And then there's also there's a coda, there's sort of a postscript on the bakery case that not a lot of people realize, and that's that there was this troll that went around and visited a bunch of Colorado bakeries and demanded custom cakes with homophobic imagery, and Bible verses. The one that comes to mind is it was an image of two groomsmen. So two guys holding hands in front of a cross with a big red X over the image, right? And in all cases, the bakery said, "Hey, we don't make bigotry cakes. And this guy tried to sue, and his case went up. And I get into that, and we explain and see why those cases are different, even though kind of at first blush they might seem the same. I would really recommend you go do it. It actually ended up being a law review article too, which is available on my website for free. So you don't have to go buy the book, and I would recommend you get it from the library anyway, which my publisher hates it when I say that.
That's the trolling part. But Matt was just talking about religious privilege and being pushed in and ending that religious privilege that says I get to do something and force it back on you. And the idea of someone having a niche in their clientele and serving a clientele that grows, and if they don't offer a service that sells, they will go out of business in that free market.
There are problems with that, in that it doesn't matter. The free market's not going to fix your problems. There are people who it is a privileged position of people who live in a more city type dwelling where there are lots and lots of options. There are some small towns that might have a single pharmacy, and it's not like you can just take your pharmacy business somewhere else with any reasonable, without being an undue burden on you. So it's not just like, oh, there's a CVS every 5 miles. No. This is why we need to have legal protection to make sure that, the self-righteous zealot pharmacist who doesn't want to give somebody their contraceptive that was prescribed by a doctor because of their religious beliefs. You need to have laws that protect people so that the person who's only got one pharmacy available isn't hindered and burdened by this.
I mean, that's 100% right, Matt. And in fact, that is why we have, for instance, the Civil Rights Act. Yeah. I mean, no, that's why we have the Civil Rights Act, is because the market failed. Because market solutions assume that people make rational rather than emotional decisions, and we don't. I mean, Donald Trump is and Trump voters may be the perfect example of it, right? Like the market allowed for discrimination for centuries. Blacks were sold in that same market for centuries, right? And then you have non-market actors like the KKK adding costs to the market, disincentivizing equality with death, right? Like if you were a business in the South in an area where the KKK had one of its reign of terrors in place, you got bombed. You had to discriminate or get bombed. Those were your choices. So while we're waiting for common decency to infuse itself into the market, an entire class of people were quite literally being murdered and being second-class citizens. Without those laws, we'd still be waiting. There's also good examples of the markets rewarding bigotry. Chick-fil-A, I talk about this in the book, really capitalized on its owner's bigotry. And even in the case, the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, the media profiles included all of these anecdotes about people who would come into the bakery and just show their support for his homophobia, right? And buy a coffee and a cake the owner would talk about how it happens all the time. There were GoFundMes that raised over $250,000, and there were multiple GoFundMes. His legal team worked for free. He sold the rights to his book, right? A free, unrestricted market populated by irrational, emotional consumers and producers is not capable of solving every problem, especially discrimination against a stigmatized minority.
Right. Yeah, I recognize the answer to this is we just need less bigoted assholes, but there is an equal application of law, and how that applies to those that are claiming to have strongly held beliefs.
He's allowed to be a bigoted asshole. He's not allowed to use his business to extend that bigotry outward and give it more power. Like if the gay couple in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case had walked up to his back door and knocked on it and said, "We want you to bake us a cake for our wedding," he could have turned them away. They don't have a right to do that. He could have cited his religion. But when he enters the marketplace as a business, as a limited liability corporation, if he wants the protections that come with that, it also comes with certain responsibilities, including obeying basic civil rights laws. That's how we stop Jim Crow.
Right.
So yeah, there's a really good, the case that kind of was at the heart of this. There is this famous case, the Piggy Park case, where you have Ann Newman and two of her friends pull into the Piggy Park barbecue, and it's a whites only business, and it's one of those restaurants where they come out to your car and take your order, and then they bring your food out later. And the waitress comes out and sees that they're black, walks back in. Another guy comes out with a pad, looks at them, refuses to serve them because they're black. Later on, somebody puts a gun to John Muggan, who's one of the other two, his head, and tells them, get out of here. We're never going to serve you. And they sue under this case. And one of the arguments that the owner of that barbecue joint made is this terrible white supremacist, is this just absolutely awful white supremacist named Maurice Bessinger, part of the White League. He on his business, like on the roof of his business, he had this like huge sign. You used to be able to see it on Google Earth back in the day, but I don't think you can see it, like Jesus is King or Jesus is Lord, something like that. And he cited, my personal religious beliefs mean that you have to strike down the entire civil rights law. And the court laughed it off in a footnote. That patently frivolous was the phrase that the Supreme Court used. And now you have the Supreme Court buying into these arguments. But I mean, Ryan, if you really are curious, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit here. I really encourage you to pick up
that's what I called for.
American Crusade and check out Chapter 5, or go to my website. And I think that it's on the publications page. There's the law review article that you can access for free there. And if you've still got questions, definitely reach out to me. I'm on social media at all the places, Andrew L. Seidel. And, if you've got specifics after that, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, so basically the answer is don't return their calls.
I'll give you no legal advice on that point, but yeah.
Well, and the scary part is being sued after the fact, that you didn't take their call,
well,
you didn't want to serve them, and
Ryan, the way it would work
uppity.
Well, and the way it would work, the way it worked in Colorado is, it's not a lawsuit. There's a complaint that's filed with the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, for instance, in the Colorado case. In every state, there's these civil rights bodies that look at this. It's not just all of a sudden you're being dragged into court. Like this is a very common thing that happens, and these disputes are out there all the time. That there are these state government bodies that deal with it. Right? It doesn't. You're not starting a Supreme Court case right at the beginning. And it's often adjudicated at that lower level, and they're normally very easy to resolve. The reason this guy's case went to the Supreme Court is because there's a Christian nationalist law firm on the other side called Alliance Defending Freedom, which is this $100 million law firm that's out to make Christian nationalism the law of the land here. And they were looking for cases like this that they could take. And they wanted cases that had First Amendment, free speech, free expression elements that they could argue in them. They were looking for particular kinds of cases and trying to take those all the way to the Supreme Court to change the law. This isn't an organic thing that just happened. This is part of a coordinated strategy by the other side.
Right. That's the issue, is looking for the issue and looking for the case, the exposure, and not necessarily solving a specific damages to an injured party.
Yeah, I mean, it's not happening the other direction, though, is I think my point.
If I get what you're saying about which direction it's going, I agree.
Okay.
All right. Well, hey, right on. Thank you, guys. Interesting conversation. Keep it up.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right. Thanks for the call, Ryan.
Good night.
All right. final call, and I apologize in advance, Brandon, but we've run long. But Brandon's calling with a question about new district maps. So go ahead, Brandon.
Ooh.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, heads up, Andrew. I've been waiting a long time to talk to you. I am a fellow cheesehead, and I've been waiting for you to come on because, yeah, right? And obviously you're well aware of the situation right now with the gerrymandered maps getting redrawn. And I am informed enough to know that this is a good thing. But after that, I have no idea on what the next steps are, when we can expect fair maps to be drawn. So I was just curious to see your input on that, and your general thoughts on how you think this is going to impact the upcoming election.
Brandon, before Andrew answers that, in the interest, you're watching the show, right, Brandon?
Sure am.
I'm going to let Andrew answer this offline so that we don't rabbit hole, because I've got to move on after this, and I need to let the call screener go too. So we'll just let Andrew talk about district maps offline. Cool. Thanks, Brandon.
You got
it. All right. Brandon, thank you for the question. Thank you for being from Wisconsin. Thank you for being interested in politics in Wisconsin. So for people who don't know, obviously Wisconsin is a huge swing state. It's going to be pivotal in the upcoming election. And Wisconsin was the worst, or one of the top worst gerrymandered states in the country. Usually the popular vote is around 50-50, but Republicans control supermajorities. I mean, like basically like 2/3, 60%, give or take, depending on the year. And the Wisconsin Supreme Court just struck down those maps as unconstitutional for a really interesting reason that I'm going to skip in the interest of time. And the last I heard, and I'm not entirely sure how when this was, because time is very strange these days, that experts had been presenting new maps to the Colorado Supreme Court, I think 6 maps, something like that, and that the court is going to select one of the maps that will comply with their decision. I believe that's how it's going to work. Don't quote me on that. But the end result, as I understand it, is going to be that the new maps will be in place for the presidential election this year, which is going to make a difference, certainly at the state, in the state level politics for Wisconsin. It's going to be a big deal. We should get closer to a 50-50 split in the Wisconsin state government now, which is going to make a huge difference on a number of really important ways.
Cool.
That's the short answer. Yeah. It's good news all around.
Well, there's some potential longer answers. There were 2 things I wanted to talk about, but we're going to skip them. So what we're going to try and do is wait until there's additional developments, because Arizona, Republicans in Arizona introduced a bill that would ban satanic displays in public spaces. It was the Reject Escalating Satanism by Preserving Essential Core Traditions Act, which spells RESPECT. And so obviously we're going down the religious respect again, but these people are too dumb to realize that, first of all, that Satanists don't actually believe in a Satan or worship a Satan. But even if they did, they would have the same rights to exercise that freedom as any Christian or Scientologist or whatever else. This is... never have I seen a more blatant demonstration of people too stupid and bound up by their privilege to understand that they're just not remotely in accordance with the law. So this is going to go nowhere, and I'm not going to waste too much of Andrew's time on it. But then in Iowa, Republicans have done almost exactly the same thing as of today. On Monday, they introduced... State Senator Sandy Salmon introduced SF 2210, a bill that would ban satanic displays or the practice of Satanism on state property. I don't need to have Andrew chime in. I have studied enough of the law to know this shit ain't gonna happen. Not anywhere, not in Iowa, nothing. And it's like, I want to look at this as like the death throes of Christian dominionism and Christian, the Christian nationalism. And yet it's not the death throes. It's these people are still going to keep flailing around, and they're going to waste time and money trying to fix something that's not broken. It's only broken in their head that other people get religious freedom. Yeah, maybe when something grows out of this, we'll dig in a little more.
I mean, to the death throes point, though, you are right. What Christian nationalism is a reaction to the fact that they are losing the power and privilege and deference that they believe they are due in our culture and in our society. Conservative Christians are losing that. They're losing the quote unquote culture wars, right? And the way to think about that is that they are raging against the dying of their privilege. That's what Christian nationalism is.
Yeah. So as a reminder, we're getting ready to do super chats. If you haven't got your super chats in, if you had questions for Andrew, we're going to go through those. Anything over $10, we will answer. I'm going to chime in and read some as well. But reminder that tomorrow's Transatlantic Call-In Show with Katy and Aron at 2 p.m. Central. Sunday will be me and Jimmy on the Sunday show. Monday, Skeptalk will be hosted by Aron Ra. Tuesday will be the premiere of our new woman-led show. The name is still in progress. And next Wednesday, I'll be back with John Gleason to do another episode of The Hang Up. Also, huge thank you to Dragon for call screening today, and to all of our mods, including Cookies, Dylan, Morgan, and Rochelle, for doing all that they do and help do this evening. We're doing the super chats. 1999 from Greg Markowski, who got in first yet again. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate you so much. Band practice got changed to tonight, so I'll have to watch this tomorrow. Thanks, Matt and Andrew. Thank you. Thanks for your constant support. And I hope band practice went well.
15 pounds from Jennifer Davis or Davies. I'm not entirely sure. Greetings from the UK. I just joined both your Patreon families. Been following you both for ages. Keep well and happy Welsh Big Jen.
Oh, thank you so much. And by the way, since
I'm in the wrong place,
I'll not only encourage people to go to patreon.com/calltheline to support the Line Network, but because I very rarely do it, I have my own Patreon. I produce 4 videos a month. I just released a video that already got like 80,000 views in the first couple of days, which is most of mine are probably 15 to 30,000, despite having almost 200,000 subscribers, because I never properly monetized my YouTube channel, which I'm fixing. You can stop calling me stupid. There's money sitting there waiting for me. Wait, you've got 180,000 subscribers and you've never made a penny off YouTube? Yes, because I cared more about the mission and the credibility than just doing it for clicks. But as I move to change that, I'm also changing the way I do some stuff. This was a response video to all atheist questions answered, and I did an answer to that. So watch it, check it out. But if you have a spare $1 or so a month, feel free to go over to patreon.com/atheist debates and support me there as well. And if you don't, keep watching this stuff. I'm going to keep putting it out for free. I just, I like having health care, and somebody just cracked a rock just cracked the windshield on my truck. So, an extra $1 or $2 helps out. And I'm gracious for everybody doing super chats, like this $10 from Sheridan Bernasconi, who's been a wonderful supporter of ours for ages. Trump threatened Joe by saying that Joe has to drop charges against him. What? Great seeing both of you together, Matt and Andrew. Yeah, Trump and his supporters would like to spin the absolutely false narrative. Oh, wait, which false narrative were we talking about? Oh, all of them?
I know.
Yeah. That this is Biden attempting to as if Jack didn't start this before Biden and with no direction from Biden.
Yeah, I mean, Trump, and then you just can put a whole blank there until the period, and then what? Question mark, and pretty much that's like a good frame for any news story at any given point in time about Donald Trump.
Yeah,
it works.
It is wild.
$20 from Dante Verona. Total myth. The independent undecided voter is somehow sophisticated and nuanced. Because you see, they could vote for Biden or Trump. As I see it, Biden is an imperfect ally where Trump is a belligerent enemy. Any commentary?
I don't disagree.
First? Yeah, I think voters are way more complicated, not necessarily in a sophisticated or nuanced way than people. People like hold a lot of contradictory positions, or positions that would seem contradictory to me at once. We don't ever think of voters as red or white, red or blue, or Democrat or Republican or Biden or Trump, but like that they really have, when you boil down to it, if you ever watched any focus groups, it's crazy. But generally, yeah, I think Biden as an imperfect ally and Trump as a belligerent enemy works for me.
I think the other day, this is let's just imagine a fantasy scenario where instead of Biden being president, I'm president, and Trump did what he did the other day, which is Trump essentially said or suggested, or at least this is what I was told, so it could be wrong, said or suggested that he wanted to debate Joe Biden immediately. If I were president and Trump said he wanted to debate me immediately, I would be on Air Force One without telling him. I would show up wherever he is with a camera crew, walk directly up to him and say, you said you wanted to debate immediately. Is this quick enough? We can start now. I don't need a speechwriter. I don't need a research team. Have you seen my job numbers? Let's do this. I got cameras. And I would fucking show him up as the confused idiot liar that he is. But yeah,
I'd pay to see that. But it would be free anyway.
Love it. There are plenty of candidates on my side, on the leftish side, that I would prefer over Biden. But and Biden's imperfect, I think, as you note, but I think he's generally done good. And I'm putting together a list of, why Biden in preparation for this election cycle, because I don't just want he's not Trump. That's enough for me, because I know what Trump is. And I would think that it should be enough for any sensible person. But I want to give people good reasons to vote for someone beyond just they're the lesser of two evils. If I had my preference, I really like Gavin Newsom. I've been impressed with things he's done and said, and I think he's a potential good new front runner after Biden. But thanks, Dante.
I mean, I'll just on the imperfect point too. I just think like people are often searching for the perfect candidate, and obviously don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. But like also there's only the only perfect candidate for you. And by that I mean the only candidate that you are going to agree with on absolutely 100% of everything is you. So that has to be you. You have to run for office. Otherwise, like expect to disagree and expect the candidate to be imperfect. Lower your expectations. Anyway.
Although I don't even know if I would agree with me at all times. And in a case where Andrew and I disagreed on something, if it was at all legal, I'd lean towards Andrew for sure. And so when you run for office, you have my vote. It's a lock. But
well, thank you, sir.
99.99 from Jesse Lampert. Nice to see you. Keep working hard. I'll be back at it all soon. I think Jesse is on the cruise.
Jesse, there were some people must be on the cruise. Yeah,
there were some people so the Florida Free Thought community is doing a cruise with Aron and his wife right now, and I saw one or two comments. So thank you, anybody who's on the cruise, who's tuned in to watch this and see what Andrew had to say, because I know there's no way you're taking time out of the cruise to see what I had to say, because I'm here all the time.
10 euros from what do you think here?
Jordim.
If people reject proposed evidence for a certain claim, do they adopt some sort of burden of proof for why they reject it?
Yeah, if they're trying to, like, if they're saying, hey, I reject this evidence and I believe I'm convinced that rejecting this particular evidence is the rational move, they have an affirmative position that carries a burden of proof. Whether or not you want to meet that burden of proof or convince anybody else, I mean, you can keep it to yourself. So it's not just merely they have a burden of proof. It is, if there's a positive claim, this evidence should be dismissed by rational actors. That's a claim that would need to be defended.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in charge of the button and forgot.
And I think this one's you.
Yeah. $49.99. Holy moly. And huge thank you from Jesse and Cody and everybody that's the super chatting. I've just been stunned by the love and support. Cody says, I love the show. So much knowledge and entertainment. I appreciate you guys doing shows so often, even if I'm too insecure to call myself. Well,
thanks, Cody. That's very kind.
It's not a matter of security. First of all, nobody will know if you call. I mean, you don't have to use your real name. There's plenty of people who lie when they call into the show. But if you have questions and you're feeling like maybe you don't want to call in and do it live, you can always do super chats like this, and you can always just reach out in chat. And by the way, I know that I don't participate because I'm kind of anti-Discord server, but I know that there are Discord servers where people love to interact about what happens on the shows and things like that. So we appreciate you, Cody. Thank you. Whoops.
$50 from Action Poker. I read Chief Justice Chase's opinion on Griffin's case in Griffin. Section 2, 14th and 15th, 1870 Enforcement Act. They articulate 14 itself is not self-executing, more so than just Section 3, and I don't see anyone discussing it. Can U.S. Supreme Court overturn Brown versus Board of Education? Okay, that's a whole lot, Action Poker. This is related.
You're going to have to explain this a little more than you thought.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into all of it because like this is a really, really deep rabbit hole. But there is a case called N Griffin that is in a case that was one of the original 14th Amendment cases, Section 3, 14th Amendment. It's 1869. And it's a non-binding opinion written by Chief Justice Salmon Chase while he was riding circuit, which means not when he was a Supreme Court justice. Or not when he was, acting as a Supreme Court justice when he was riding circuit. So
it's just like an unsigned note.
It's like it's like a lower court opinion. And actually, if people who read The Founding Myth will remember Salmon Chase from the chapter on the Civil War and In God We Trust, because as Lincoln's Treasury Secretary, Salmon helped orchestrate putting In God We Trust on our coins for the first time. And apparently he was like really awful to work with, and also really thought that he should be president, not Lincoln. So he kept threatening to resign. And like after like the third or fourth, I don't remember, fifth time maybe, I don't remember how many, when Lincoln has his nomination locked for the second term, Lincoln calls his bluff and is like, "Yep, I accept your resignation," and then puts him on the Supreme Court to get him out of the way. So it's like a really cool, fascinating history. But Chase looks at kind of the question, are people automatically disqualified under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment? And he doesn't like what he sees. And he used what he called the quote, argument from inconveniences, I think, which is basically to say, like, look, it would be really, really inconvenient to disqualify all of these folks and annul all of their official acts. So it must not be self-executing. He's kind of doing actually what a lot of political commentators are doing now. And he's saying, look, the outcome of applying the Constitution as it's written scares us, so we don't think you should do it. Now, there may be a debate to be had there, but it doesn't, as Chase argued in the case, actually change the words that are in the 14th Amendment or what they do. And those words are very, very clear. To me, you can start this and end this with the language of the 14th Amendment itself. And in terms of people not discussing it, it actually is being discussed. It was pretty widely discussed in the sort of those scholarly circles that I mentioned earlier, especially the William Bode law review article that kicked a lot of this stuff off. They look deep into the case, and it's a really, really poorly written case. I mean, I would not be surprised if it ends up being in the Supreme Court's final opinion on this. I do think it'll probably pop up in oral argument at least once. It is in a few of the briefs. It's one of the only opinions on the 14th Amendment out there, and it cuts in Trump's favor. So it has been used by the other side quite a bit.
I wonder.
Yeah.
So on the final portion of this about whether the Supreme Court can overturn Brown v. Board of Education. Now, the Supreme Court can overturn whatever, and we live in an era where precedent seems to not matter as much. But
Yes.
Brown was unanimous. What's the likelihood that this Supreme Court would overturn any unanimous decision?
Lemon versus Kurtzman was a unanimous opinion, 8-0, older and stronger precedent than Roe versus Wade. It is one of the central pillars of the separation of church and state. And the Supreme Court wiped it away in 2022. You didn't hear much about it other than from people like me, but that happened. So I don't think that saves it. The race issue is the reason that is more likely to not fall. The court's been attacked on this ground, like on the civil rights cases that we were talking about, like the public accommodation cases, and it's an area where they're not doing well across the board. So, I mean, the answer to that last question, though, is can the Supreme Court overturn Brown versus Board of Education? Yes, they can. And there are a lot of federal judges, conservative federal judges, that were put up through Leo's network that refused to say that Brown versus Board of Education was rightly decided in their nomination hearings, which is bonkers.
Yeah, wow. Thanks so much, Action Poker. Appreciate you and the question. 999 from Jay Solis. Pronounced Jay Solis. Hi, Matt and Andrew. I got it right, but I love what you all do. Had an argument about immigration. Was wondering what you guys thought about the best ways to fix our immigration system in the U.S. You're gay, homie. Let me do this real quick. I have no clue. What I am convinced of, though, is that the immigration problems that we have in the U.S. are not being honestly addressed by Republicans. They may also not be honestly addressed by Democrats, but they are definitely not honestly addressed by Republicans. And we already know from leakers that they are not interested in resolving this problem because they want the political football on immigration. They want Trump to be able to run on this. So Biden may not be able to do anything to potentially fix problems related to border issues and immigration merely because they want Trump to be able to use that against him, despite the fact that it's his problem. He never built a wall. He shouldn't have built a wall. He shouldn't have promised to build a wall. I wish instead that there was a bipartisan anonymous committee in Congress made up of individuals dedicated to solving immigration problems who could work in secret, then propose legislation that already has bipartisan support, that you don't get to attach anything to, you don't get to lobby on behalf of. Here's our best effort at this, and then let everybody vote it up or down as is. We'll never see that, which is, well, I'm not in charge of anything, and I shouldn't be in charge of anything because my solution isn't even a solution. It's about fixing the system more than it is about fixing immigration. Just hoping that if we fix Congress, that immigration might be one of the things that gets fixed as a side issue. I don't know how to fix it.
Yeah. I don't know how to fix it either. It's an incredibly complicated issue that's not, I mean, we're talking foreign aid, foreign policy. There's so much that goes into it. I'm quite confident, though, that killing people at the border with a razor wire is not a fix or a solution.
Yeah, you know what else I wish? I have really good job security. This is my job. I have incredibly good job security because religion's not going anyway. Andrew's got incredible job security, right up until the world falls.
Unfortunately,
but what I wish is that I take lots of questions and I engage in debates, and the debates are on important issues. When I go down to Florida this Easter weekend to debate the resurrection, it's going to be important because I'm engaging with a bunch of people who believe that the resurrection occurred. or likely believe the resurrection occurred. And they use that as a foundation to bolster their beliefs, which then informs what actions they're going to take and informs how they vote. And that has an impact on everybody else. People call into the show tonight. Somebody called in about, is there an example of material things increasing information in the genome because they heard something about Dawkins or they saw a video clip or whatever else? It's each of these things is important. Somebody else who called and then left wanted to argue for the necessity of God. These I don't want to downplay the importance of this. This is pretty much my life's work. And yet, I would love it if we could all agree, the left and the right, Democrats and Republicans and independents or whatever you are, that whether there's a God or not, he's not doing a fucking thing about the problems that we face on a daily basis. He's not doing shit on immigration. He's not doing anything on LGBT issues. He's not doing anything on women's issues. He's not doing anything on separation of church and state. God is, to go back to devil's advocate and quote Pacino, an absentee landlord. If in fact he exists, he's not doing a thing. And so we can sit here and argue until we die about whether or not we have a good reason to believe God. But even if he's real and you have a good reason to believe in him, he's fucking worthless. And the fact that he's not doing anything either demonstrates that he doesn't exist or doesn't give a shit. And all these people are arguing about whether or not their possibly invisible friend or imaginary friend is more important, and what he cares about with regard to whether who uses which bathroom or whether you've got a dingle dangle or internal genitalia or any of that stuff. We're never going to fix the real problems because we can't get past this nonsense about you've got an imaginary friend that really fucking hates me. Well, I hate him back and he's not even real. How much time, how many more decades are we going to sit here and argue and argue and argue? And then we're going to go make more court cases. And the lawyers are all going to get filthy fucking rich, except for Alina Habba and maybe a couple others. And
hey, man, I work at a nonprofit too.
Anything. True. I didn't mean all lawyers.
Yeah.
Hashtag
no, I know.
Not Andrew.
Hashtag
that's a hashtag.
Lawyers. Yeah, hashtag not all lawyers. Yeah. No, I mean none of the people doing the good work on this side make nonprofit
nightmarish.
Anyway,
I don't know how we fix problems. We have real issues coming down the pipe. We have real issues related to identity, cloning, climate change. We could all just be dead and fucked. It may be too late, but you want to call in and say, if I use this particular philosophical argument, it seems to suggest that God is a necessary being in some reality, and therefore, if it's necessary in some reality, it's necessary in all realities, and therefore it exists in, oh my God, go the fuck away. Anyway, continuing on.
I don't know who this is. Is this you or me? Oh, I'll do it because it's a legal question. $9.99 from Michael Garcia. I'm a public high school teacher. What are the legalities of having religious clubs on campus? Some outside adults of the church also come into the school. They offer pizza every meeting to get kids. Okay. Number one, go to au.org, and there's a report of violations section. You can contact our lawyers there. You can explain what's happening at your school. Our lawyers will get back to you with an answer on this. Generally, it's not okay for outside adults to come into schools and prey on other people's children. That's a pretty good general rule, especially if they're pushing church things. Religious clubs on school is like slightly different. If they're genuinely student-run schools, there are instances in when that may be okay, right? Like you think of like Fellowship of Christian Athletes, just like there's gay straight alliances, right? Like those can be okay, but you get into some difficult territory when you get into things like the Good News Club, which often operates like kind of outside the bounds of what is allowed. So even if they are allowed to exist, oftentimes they're not operating within the rules. So it's one of the reasons it's really important to get a little bit more legal guidance. And Michael, we'll keep your name confidential. You don't have to be public facing on any of this. And if there is a violation, we can actually write a letter to the school district, explain why this is wrong. And most of the time that's good enough to get it stopped. AU.org.
Awesome. $10 for Monkey at Typewriter. Here's my very stupid question. What do you think the odds of any of the criminal stuff sticking is? Trump seems to be super slippery, and I've basically lost any faith that he'll see consequences.
Yeah, I mean, I get the skepticism. I certainly do get the skepticism. I mean, he's getting boxed in by the day, and his outs are disappearing. Some of the cases he's not going to be able to get at, even if he wins presidency, in terms of being able to pardon himself or stop the prosecutions. So, I mean, I think he's in trouble. I think he's in trouble, and I hope he's in trouble. He should be in trouble. I do think we're at the FO part of the FAFO, and I'm here for it. I'm ready.
It's one thing. I mean, I think half the people I know, if not more than half the people I know, if you were to say, hey, are you convinced that Trump's guilty and deserving of actual prison time, would raise their hands and be like, duh. And if you took all those same people with their hand up and say, leave your hand up if you think Trump's actually going to do any time or need to be pardoned to avoid doing time, I think most all of those hands would go down. Nobody's convinced that there's ever going to be any accountability.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'll go back to what I said at the very top of this about first of all, the court not being a savior for us, right? Like I that is that's probably my guiding star, my North Star these days, is like, the court is not going to save us from anything at any time. Don't expect it. The court is not your savior. But the other thing is that the way to channel that frustration, that fear, that worry about what is going to happen, is to ensure that this menace loses in a landslide, in an avalanche, not just in the popular vote, but in the electoral college too. So if you are worried about this and sitting here watching this and being worried, do something about it. Go get active in making sure he loses this election. If you don't know what to do, one resource I recommend for people is go to Vote Save America. They have a ton of resources. They actually help you select volunteering in a way that will play to your strengths and work for you. So really, absolutely crucial. That is the way to make sure that he does see some consequences, that we don't have to go through another 4 years, which our republic genuinely is very likely not to survive, in my opinion.
Taylor Swift wants you to go register to vote. I'll throw her name out and say, do it. Do what if Taylor Swift tells you to go register to vote, go register to vote. If you're not registered to vote, please register to vote. Taylor will love you, or at least admire you for doing the right thing. We got to rig that Super Bowl. $10 from Entangled Loam. The New Deal was a big deal, so you're still technically correct. The best kind of correct. Thoughts on expanding the Supreme Court to include one justice per appellate circuit? I will partially answer this. Andrew, like me, is in favor of absolutely blowing up and expanding the courts. But what about, is this a specific thing? Should we expand the Supreme Court to include one justice per appellate circuit?
Yeah, so that would get us up to 13 justices, which is a nice number that people like. And it has the benefit of having a little bit of historical backing, in that we used to have one justice who would ride the circuit like Sam and Chase did. And so you had one justice for each circuit. I don't think we ought to limit ourselves necessarily to that number or to those circuits, because I think what we would be doing if we were making that argument is saying the reason we need to expand the Supreme Court is because we used to have justices one per circuit and now we don't. And that's, first of all, that's not true. That's not why we want to expand the Supreme Court. And second of all, I don't want to hide the ball like that. We need to expand the Supreme Court because it is broken, because it was captured, because it was stolen. Like the court was captured by the Republicans and by the Christian nationalists. Like, they deliberately went and set out to capture it, and it is paying huge dividends. And that requires a political fix. And the only fix, my lights are dying, we've been doing this so long, is expanding that court. So the number 13 justices is fine with me. Pump it up to 17, pump it up to 21, pump it up to 51. I don't care. But it needs to be expanded, and that's got to be a priority in the next Democratic administration.
Do you not have electricity there? Do you have to run your lights and everything off batteries?
One of them is a battery operated one. Yeah. Actually, two of them are. I normally have them plugged in, but I rearranged everything, and I apparently didn't plug that one in. So yeah,
that's all right.
We'll see what happens.
You still look great, and we got about 10 or 15 left.
Okay. This is me. You. Okay, $9.99 from MBD to know. If Trump winds up being disqualified from the election, what happens in states in which he has already won a primary? Yeah, I mean, good question. He can't go on the ballot. It's going to be state by state. All the major parties, including some of the minor parties, and the states have different rules that deal with this. So the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have internal rules that address this issue. I mean, think about it. They have to, right? Because like, it's not just that somebody could get disqualified, but like, it's far more likely that at some point, a candidate dies, right? Or something like that. That's a very real possibility that parties have had to plan for. So they all have rules in place that kind of go over this. And it is like, it depends on when it happens in terms of the convention, all this stuff, but it'll be a shit show, and it'll be fun to watch. And it'll be very dramatic. The media will love it. There'll be the conventions will be good TV. But you have to go look up the rules for each party. And in fact, I know there have been a couple of good Substacks, or maybe Vox did one that can actually like dive into like if it happens between these dates or between these events, right? Between Super Tuesday and before the convention, all that kind of stuff. It just depends. There's way too many variables to answer that one, but that answer is definitely out there you can find it.
$10 from the Raven, 200 him Taklehayan Latawama. Good day, friends. I probably butchered that. Remember to consensually give that like button a nice hard slap on the derriere. Jimmy, go take a South of Heaven chokeslam from Damian Priest. Another wrestling reference. Thanks so much, Raven.
$19.99 from Felipe Troncoso. Hi, Andrew. Any plans on coming back to Minnesota for another talk? Thanks, both of you, for all your work. I had such a blast in Minneapolis. There's an amazing group up there, the Humanists Minnesota. Humanists are doing that group's just doing amazing work up there, including with the legislature. Matt, if you've not gone up there, you ought to. But I would love to. I'd love to, Felipe. I'll chat with. I have an in now, so I'll chat about coming back. It's an easy trip for me from here.
I'm an incredibly lazy speaker, so if somebody wants me to go anywhere, don't tell me to go. Tell them to invite me, because that's how I do it. You can actually. I've never sent a message to any organization anywhere saying, "Hey, I'm looking to travel around. I'm happy to come talk." I can't. I'm happy to raise money and promote The Line and Black Nonbelievers and Recovering from Religion and Andrew and Freedom from Religion Foundation and Americans United, everything. I'm really bad at promoting myself. It's, I don't know, something in my nature. So if y'all want to see me somewhere, tell the people where you want to see me. And then when they ask, I just tend to say yes. But $20 from Mr. Han. Are you at all worried about Obergefell and Bostock coming up before SCOTUS again? If they do you think any of the three most recent appointments could be persuaded not to overturn these cases? I'm very worried about it, but
I am too. I have written about this publicly. I wrote an article for Religion Dispatches like a couple of years ago, talking about how the Supreme Court was coming for Obergefell. You can count heads. count votes on the Supreme Court. I think there are the votes to overturn Obergefell. I think it's a question of getting a vehicle to go there. And in fact, believe it or not, Kim Davis's case, Kim Davis, the Kentucky bigot, the clerk who denied people marriage licenses, because that case is still going on. And the Christian nationalist group in that case is Liberty Counsel. And they have said that they are going to use the current iteration of her case to take Obergefell back to the Supreme Court and try to get them to overturn it. So I don't know whether that case is, given its convoluted nature, I don't know that it will happen. I know Alito and Thomas love that case and love Kim Davis and would love to make her the one who overturned Obergefell. But yeah, I'm really, really worried about that. Deeply concerned. And then that does Bostock is a discrimination case. I'm a little less concerned about that, but only because in the Bostock opinion, Gorsuch wrote a backdoor for a religious freedom challenge, which is coming too. And I talk about that in American Crusade if you want to read more about that. It's 100% coming. It was very obvious at the time when he wrote that opinion. $10 from William Mattis. Loving the beard. I'm jealous. I just get a scraggly neck beard, and as a fat nerd, that's the last thing I need. I like the beard too, and I like your scraggly neck beard, William.
I think you looked handsome there, William. But
yeah.
Another $10 from the Raven 200. I'm having res dogs for dinner tonight. Thank you, Matt and Andrew, and everyone at the line except you, Jimmy. Go get locked in a Scorpion Deathlock from Sting and take a 630 Senton from Ricochet. See, people need to learn all about wrestling. By the way, Raven, you don't have to super chat again to answer this question. I'll try and keep an eye on chat. Have you watched the Iron Claw, and would you give it a thumbs up or thumbs down? Seth went and saw it and said it wasn't for him. I haven't seen it. I've heard mixed things. I'm not worried about the fact that they completely left one of the brothers out, but as old school fan of Von Erich's, I'm interested in wrestling fans and whether or not they think it's worth seeing. So
1999 from Marissa. Can other representatives/senators be found ineligible to be on the ballot? How can we facilitate, I'm going to say testing that? I think testing that. Yeah, I mean, any public official that has taken an oath to uphold the Constitution and that engaged in insurrection could be found liable for doing so. There have been a couple cases where that's happened. There's a case in New Mexico about Cus Griffin. Cus Griffin was an Otero County commissioner in New Mexico. Cus Griffin, at the January 6th insurrection, climbed up onto the west facade, up on the balcony there, got a bullhorn and said a prayer over the crowd. He was wearing a cowboy hat. He started Cowboys for Trump. I got a whole thing about him and also the books. But anyway, yeah, he was disqualified from public office. That's the highest level we've gotten so far. There are a couple. You'd have to prove that they engaged in insurrection, which is a little more difficult for some of them than it is for Trump, who very clearly called the mob to DC and called on them to go march and is the one who incited them, and then also had the power to stop the mob from, quote, hanging Mike Pence, which is what they were chanting and what he was encouraging. Instead of doing that, he further inflamed them by talking about how Mike Pence was a coward. And then for 187 minutes, he did nothing. He did nothing while the mob stormed the Capitol, attacked the Capitol, tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power. He sat there and watched for 187 minutes. And whatever you think about whether or not he engaged in insurrection and he has a free speech right, that alone is that 187 minutes, every one of those minutes, it should be a nail in his political coffin. Should be a disqualification from public office.
Yep. $10 from William Mattis. Matt, do you have a favorite alien race from Star Trek, and if so, who and why? People who tune into my Twitch channel will know that the questions that I hate the most are, what is your favorite X? Because outside of my brother being my favorite person ever and Arden being my favorite partner, because how do you not? I'm not good at favorites. What's your favorite this? What's your favorite that? I'm terrible at it because it could change at any moment. So, on Star Trek Alien Race. Yeah. Nope, I got nothing. I can't do a favorite. There are some that I would put pretty low. Maybe just from a fun standpoint, and because DS9's story depth was so much better, maybe Kardashians. But the Kardashians have ruined that for me a little bit. But
feel like you're going to get more email about that than anything else.
Probably. That's the stuff people are going to care about.
$15 from Erica Mack. As a trans woman, I would like to know your assessment of just how bad it is likely to get for the trans community should Trump or another Republican win the presidency. Yeah, I mean, I'm very, very worried. I mean, if Trump wins again, I mean, it's an sort of, in my opinion, it's an all bets are off situation. When Trump won last time, nobody, especially on that side, really expected it. It was an unexpected win. They were not prepared. So they were not prepared to do the kind of damage that they wanted to and they could do. Really the main things that he got done were capturing the Supreme Court and a massive tax cut plan. A lot of the other stuff that he tried to do got rolled back. They are ready this time. I'm sure you've all heard of Project 2025 by now. I mean, this is a way to just gut the federal government. And one of the main things that they're trying to do when they're doing that, if you listen to people that's talking about, getting rid of the regulatory state, like all of that's true, yes. But what they're really trying to do is get rid of all of the checks and balances and safeguards that protect people from power-hungry authoritarians like Trump and his ilk. All of the people that acted as brakes on Trump last time are gone. He is just surrounded by the absolute worst enablers, and that's going to be true more and more as this campaign goes on. I do not think that our constitutional republic survives another Trump presidency. I don't see how it does. He did not want to let go of power last time, was not prepared for it. He's going to spend 4 years consolidating power and making sure that he does not have to let go at the end of it. They've gone around and eliminated everybody who stood up to him in any way, shape, or form as a Republican from the Republican Party, from positions of power. They've been quietly doing that all around the country. And all of that means it's going to be bad for everybody. But of course, it's going to be worse for the most vulnerable of us. And that is not just the LGBTQ community, but the T in the LGBTQ, because you have been the target of these assholes for a long time. So I am deeply, deeply worried about what our country looks like on the other side of this election. And it's one of the reasons that I'm telling everybody to get out there and fight.
I do have one little bit of potentially good news, and thanks for reminding me. So thanks, Erica, so much for the contribution and everything else. I just recorded as one of the videos for last month, but I hadn't set it live to the public yet, a video about a study that showed why people are leaving Christianity. And it's not necessarily the reasons that some of us would hope for. What I did just now while Andrew was talking was I set that video public. I'm going to post a link to it in chat right now so that when we're done with the show, if you want more or you want to save it for later, you can go check out that video that I did on why people are leaving Christianity. And spoiler, the biggest reason is Christianity's treatment of the LGBTQ community. Now, this is not a robust scientific study. There are a number of problems with it, but I go through there and talk about it. So thanks for reminding me to put that out. Hopefully, it is actually accurately reflective of why the majority of people who are leaving Christianity are doing it, because it makes me optimistic about some things. And yet it doesn't make me any more optimistic about reasoned arguments and skepticism actually winning out, because it's just another emotional appeal. If you've got friends and family who are queer, I mean, it's as good a reason as any. But
yeah, I mean, and I just want to remind everybody, like, the last election was decided by 40,000 votes in 3 states. That's not even a Taylor Swift concert. It's like half a Taylor Swift concert, and she wants you to go get registered to vote, and she wants you to find a way to help out. So you have to.
Absolutely. You have to do what Taylor says.
Yeah, you have to.
$10 for Monkey to Typewriter. Do you think that the DNC's refusal to entertain a robust primary will hurt them in the long run? And when can we expect the Seidel for President campaign? Your gay homie, Matt, loved the line and crew. Thanks so much, Monkey.
I mean, I'm assuming you mean this election on the robust primary, and I don't think so, is my guess.
When you've got an incumbent and a booming economy, and you have an incumbent, it's a political mistake to try to replace Biden now, no matter how imperfect he may be. So no, I don't think. I think most people don't give a shit about the primaries from both parties. They're just going to roll through, and whoever gets nominated with the letter and color that they're associated with, that's who's going to get their vote. I think the people who are exceptions also aren't worried about whether or not the DNC has a particularly robust primary. People vote to either maintain the status quo or to respond to threats against it. And I don't think having an incumbent like this is an issue.
I think the numbers show this too. I mean, like New Hampshire, like Biden won in a write-in campaign, even though he didn't do anything deliberately. In South Carolina, I can't even remember the guy's name. The guy who's supposedly running a primary campaign against Biden, who was in South Carolina, camped out, placed below Marianne Williamson. They each got 1% of the vote. It doesn't seem to be having any impact. When the second part of this question, I guess I would have to do the typical answer, which is if I was called to serve, I would have to decide.
Okay. I would not be involved in Andrew's campaign in any public facing way, because I think I would be a drag on the ticket if anybody knew I was involved at all. But I'll be standing on the sideline and yelling as much as I can from here to vote for that guy.
I appreciate that. €5 from Old Man's Pain. Dang it, Mojo Nixon has died. A voice of reason gone too early. Thanks for the shows and keep fighting the good fight.
Somebody else died this week who was not a voice of reason, and that's Toby Keith. But I've heard good things, despite the fact that I know Toby. I think Toby Keith and I could have actually hung out despite vehement disagreement on countless political issues. But he died of stomach cancer on Monday, and so my condolences to his family and friends on that loss as well. Mojo Nixon died. Wow. $9.99 from Brock Smith. Safe travels to Florida. We need you to make an appearance in Mississippi sometime. So I'm not opposed to it, although I will say there were periods of time where my ex-wife and I, whenever we would drive to, Gulf Shores or Florida or whatever else, we would drive across Louisiana and Mississippi, and Beth would refuse and tell me, do not stop in Mississippi. I wouldn't even stop to piss in Mississippi because of their, they were doing everything they could to shut down anything close to rights to abortion and healthcare like that. Excuse me. And so, we avoided Mississippi a lot, but I'll go if y'all need me. All right. There you go.
$10 from SJL. SJL. I get it. Trump is never going to win Massachusetts. What can I do here? I love this question. No, there's a million things you can do to volunteer from where you are. Obviously giving money, but you can phone bank from where you are. You can text message from where you are to volunteer. this is a getting out the vote and getting people informed to vote is like the name of the game. Again, the resource that I recommend people use if you want to do that is Vote Save America. And I don't actually, let me just check. I don't know if it's .org or .com. America. I think it's org. It's probably gone. Let's see. My internet's going slow because of the video. Anyway, Vote Save America. Do that. VoteSaveAmerica.com. VoteSaveAmerica.com. And they will help you find ways that you can volunteer wherever you are. And like you can have an impact. If you've never like gotten on a phone bank and called or texted with people in swing states, it is, especially if you watch this show. In fact, like people watching this show, if you dig this kind of argument and debate, like this is tailor-made for you. You should be doing it. So that would be what I would say, SJL. Go there, find some sort of volunteer that works for you, and start working from now until the end of the election, and don't leave anything on the table. If you do, you're going to be pissed off at yourself if it goes the wrong way.
999 from Enuma. Is this good advice, Andrew? All Dems and independents should register as Republicans and vote for Nikki Haley so that the worst case scenario, if Biden loses, at least we don't get Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this. This is like talking about not open primaries where like it's a closed primary and then you go try to stack the primary against Trump. I mean, I love Nikki Haley in this race right now because it is driving Trump insane. It's clearly getting to him, and she has finally like decided she's going to say the things that she needs to say to actually win the primary. Though she probably decided a little too late. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that this is smart or that it's going to be useful or going to work. But I do want her to stay in for a very long time, for as long as she said she was going to stay in, I think through Super Tuesday. And I hope that's true.
If for no other reason than it annoys him, which brings me pleasure.
Yes. He deserves it. 10 euros from Jerry O'Connor. Thanks, Jerry.
With no message. And yet we greatly appreciate you, Jerry. Thank you very much. And the final possibly the final super chat of the day, assuming somebody doesn't get another one in while I'm wrapping this up. $10 from the Raven 200. Just because I can. Jimmy, go take a shooting star press from Matt Seidel, a 619 from Rey Mysterio, and a Sister Abigail from Bray Wyatt. Rest in peace, Wyndham Rotunda. Good night, y'all. Matt, you're gay, homie. Thanks so much. Let's put a button on this. Andrew's already told you guys exactly what you need to do, how to get involved, how to participate. I'm going to tell you, you can also, there are links down below, or there should be links down below for where you can find Andrew on social media, Andrew L. Seidel on Instagram and on Twitter. You can go there to find information about the books that he writes and the work that he does. Both now for UA and in the past with the Freedom from Religion Foundation and other organizations. There's a lot of work to be done. And there is a lot of things where you could be overwhelmed. You could feel panicked. You could feel despondent. It could be, I don't know what's going to happen. And guess what? We're right there with you. I am a hot mess a good chunk of the time. Every time I get a piece of news that in a sane world would make me go, hooray, we fixed the problem, the other part of my brain goes, yeah, this isn't going to matter. For some reason, we seem to be living, at least in part, for some people, in a post-truth, post-science, post-reality, post-justice world. And that's incredibly frustrating. And we can look around and try to find people to blame. We can sit around and argue with the people who are voting against their own interests, the people who are going to be a single issue voter and just say, well, they're the ones that want to get rid of abortion. So I don't care if we all go broke and people die. And I don't care about immigration. And I don't care about the queer community or any rights. We could do all of that. Or we can look at this and say, I need to take real steps to make sure I'm comfortable at the end of this year, having done everything that I could to work to normalize atheism, to stand up for church-state separation, to stand up for dignity and equality, to make sure that just because a significant portion of the population of the United States has been misinformed, misled, misguided, that doesn't doom us all. Because beyond our differences on which bathroom people get to use, there are huge issues related to climate change. There are huge issues related to things coming down the pipe with our rights with regard to cloning. Who owns my DNA? The question doesn't matter at all right now, because as it stands, we could all be dead before any of that's a possibility. There are people who are dedicated to making the world the way they want it to be. And right now, the ones who have been the most successful in the past few years at making the worlds they want to be are the ones who are making the world worse for rational people, for skeptics, for atheists, for the queer community, for African Americans, for immigrants, for anyone and everyone, if you're paying attention. And that's why the rest of us have to say no more. Buy Andrew's books, support him elsewhere. Get him to agree right now that over this next year, we're not going to wait 10 months before Andrew comes back on here, that when there's something important, when there's a decision, whenever he has free time, we can get Andrew back in here to educate all of us and tell us, hey, I feel just as bad as you do, but I'm not going to give up because we can actually fix it. That's what I need. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining me this week. I've missed the hell out of you. I can't wait till we get to hang out. Huge thank you to Arden for producing the show. Everybody for your super chats. Whew. There's a lot to do. Get to work.
Thank you, buddy. Always a pleasure.
Hey, look, there's a list of patron producers that help make all this stuff happen. Ooh, I see Kathleen. Who I didn't see tonight. Go to patreon.com/calltheline. And don't forget to hit up Line Merch so that you can get your own Your Gay Homie sweatshirt.